Chapter 705. Whereabouts of a legendary item. This is Solomon's treasure? Feng could not help his surprise. Originally, he had thought Solomon's treasure would be a mountain of gold or an ocean of silver. It should at least be a high-ranking treasure chest. However, he had never expected Solomon's treasure to be a book. Could it be an epic item? Thinking so, Feng picked up the ancient book. The pressure the book radiated instilled fear into anyone who neared it. This was a power that only an epic ranked or above item possessed. In God's domain, although epic weapons and equipment were precious, epic tools were far more rare. Take the Bible of Darkness for example. Even without occupying an equipment slot, it increased a player's strength significantly. This was a benefit that no weapon or piece of equipment could provide. After Feng picked up the book, he was suddenly alerted of a system notification. System, you have obtained the ancient document Solomon's treasure. Do you wish to activate the ancient document? So, it's an ancient document. Excitement appeared on Feng's face upon hearing that the book was actually an ancient document. No wonder it's called a treasure. There were many kinds of books in God's domain. Some were meant for reading, some could be used to learn skills, and some offered their own abilities. The Bible of Darkness belonged to the third category. In addition to these three, there was another category that was extremely rare and special: the ancient document. Ancient documents held records of God's domain. However, players that obtained an ancient document had only one chance to activate it. Upon activation, players could obtain one of God's domain secrets. Although this seemed trivial, in the past, players in God's domain had gone crazy over a single ancient document. In the past, ancient documents sold in the Blackwing auction house at much higher prices than even fragmented legendary items. Why were they worth so much money? They were so valued because an ancient document could unlock the whereabouts of a legendary item, offering players a high chance of obtaining one for themselves. Of course, aside from legendary items, one could also learn the whereabouts of powerful super skills or tools. However, with the goal of growing stronger, a legendary item was undeniably the best choice. Legendary items in God's domain were extremely limited. One had to expend unimaginable effort to claim one. One needed luck and strength. Every legendary item was extremely difficult to obtain. Moreover, the game would never reveal a legendary item's exact location to players, only clues. Unfortunately, clues were never 100% accurate, and most of the clues relating to legendary items were likely traps. Even after a long search, one might find nothing but a dead end, realizing that all their effort had been for naught. In the past, to obtain a single legendary item, many large guilds had mobilized every available guild force, spending a large amount of time to gain some clue. With the many clues they obtained, they would search for the location of said legendary item. One could just imagine the manpower and resources that the search required. Hence, even after mobilizing an entire guild, the chances of successfully claiming a legendary item were quite low. However, one could locate a legendary item with an ancient document. There was no need to check every clue they had obtained. Hence, ancient documents were precious and valuable. It seems that my trip wasn't a waste. Feng grinned as he looked down at the ancient document in his hands. Although he had quite a few clues regarding legendary items, he did not actually know how to obtain them, as no player would ever reveal such high-level secrets. In the past, those who had obtained legendary items kept a tight lid on any information. Feng had only found a few clues after his guild invested in quiet investigation. Although it is impossible to obtain a legendary item at my current level, knowing the precise whereabouts of one will allow me to prepare. Feng then clicked to activate Solomon's treasure. After Feng confirmed his decision, Solomon's treasure opened and released a blinding, golden glow. In the next moment, a five-fold magic array appeared before Feng. Countless runes danced inside the magic array. Suddenly, the space surrounding Feng froze. Feng's connection with the outside world severed completely. System, ancient document, Solomon's treasure activating. System, beginning connection with the main God system. System, verification completed. Ancient document confirmed as the 6th volume of Solomon's book. Allowing connection with God's domain's database. System, connection with God's domain's database is successful. You have one chance to access God's domain's database. Please enter desired inquiry. Luckily, I know the name of a legendary item. No one else would have any idea of what to search for. Feng's grin deepened. Immediately, he entered the words, Solomon's sword. System: searching for information on Solomon's sword. System: search completed. Confirming data on Solomon's sword. System: confirmation completed. Do you wish to accept the information? Feng then clicked to accept. Feng felt a plethora of information relating to Solomon's sword flow into his brain. The system displayed a total of 3,687 clues before him. Immediately, Feng felt a headache coming on. Verifying one clue was an extremely difficult task, not to mention 3,687. Even a large guild would go mad if it had to verify every one of these clues. At this point, Feng came to understand one thing. Those who had found legendary items were either players who had received the blessing of the main god system and possessed heaven-defying luck, or they were as frightening powerful as super guilds. Not only did super guilds have an abundance of members at their disposal, but they also possessed monster-like experts. Only with this kind of manpower could they search for a legendary item. It was practically impossible for a third-rate or second-rate guild. I didn't think that all of the clues I gained in the past were all fakes. Fortunately, I haven't attempted to verify those clues. Otherwise, I would have wasted a ton of time, Feng said, relieved. Among the 3,687 clues listed, the system only confirmed 5 as legitimate. In other words, only these 5 clues could lead him to Solomon's sword, one of the 10 great legendary weapons. If Feng had not obtained the ancient document, he would never find Solomon's sword. Of the 3,687 clues, every clue required a long time to verify. The easiest clue required one to spend 2 or 3 days' time, while the more difficult clues required up to half a month to verify. Moreover, due to level restrictions, Feng would not be able to visit many of these places yet. Even if he only needed to spend 1 day verifying each clue, it would still take 10 years to plow through them all. Without the ancient document, obtaining Solomon's sword was a dream. After receiving the information, Feng grew somewhat dizzy. Suddenly, the sound of another system notification reached his ears. Chapter 706, Disaster Treasure Chest. White River City, Divine Colosseum. Ever since they had discovered that the Flower of Seven Sins targeted Zero Wing, Aqua Rose and the guild's upper echelons had holed up inside the Divine Colosseum. They continuously expended magic crystals and 100-berry wine in the Trial Tower and Divine Battlefield to train as much as possible. As a result, Zero Wing's upper echelons broke their previous records in the Trial Tower again and again, shocking White River City's players. Awe towards Zero Wing swept through the city once again. Meanwhile, inside the Divine Colosseum, a bald man in gray leather armor stared at the trial list while sipping vodka. Suddenly, a thin, cloaked youth walked up and sat down beside this bald man. Accurate 9, what's the situation regarding Zero Wing's upper echelons? The thin youth sent a whisper to the bald man as he ordered an ice blue spirit. Their strength has been improving rapidly. Currently, 3 people have reached the 8th floor. 7 people have reached the 7th floor. My guess is that it won't be very long before the others reach the 7th floor as well. It would not be easy to kill all of them back to level 0, the bald man, Accurate 9, responded, laughing. However, the stronger they are, the better. This way we can charge more for the job. Nodding, the thin youth said, Indeed. I just wonder whether or not Open Source Corporation will be willing to pay the price. I think they will, Accurate 9 said as he handed the NPC bartender another magic crystal, purchasing another bottle of vodka. Magic crystals are the lifeline of all of God's Domain's players. If OSC obtains the Stoneclaw Mountains, their future earnings will far surpass the cost of hiring us. Let's hope that OSC is willing to pay this price then. It's been a long time since I've accepted a major job. Zero Wing should prove to be quite the challenge. I can also use this chance to polish my skills a little bit, the youth said. Downing the ice blue spirit, he shifted his gaze to the 3 names listed on the trial list's 8th floor. Where's Black Flame's name? Black Flame has always been mysterious. Even now, I have yet to discover the exact extent of this person's strength. However, based on the information I've collected thus far, he should have progressed relatively far in the refinement realm. He might have even reached your standard, Accurate 9 said seriously as he sent a sideway glance at the thin youth beside him. My standard? The 2nd stage of the refinement realm? That's interesting. I look forward to taking him on, the youth said, a hint of excitement shining in his eyes. He looked like a predator that had just caught the scent of new prey. Pleiades, don't even think about it. Silver has already reserved Black Flame. At most, you can pick your target from the trial tower's 8th floor, Accurate 9 said, smiling as he pointed to Violet Cloud's, Fire Dance's and Aqua Rose's names. Silver? Why is he suddenly interested in this mission? The youth named Pleiades said, slightly surprised. Hasn't he always targeted those old monsters? How should I know what's going through his mind? Accurate 9 said, shrugging. However, OSC has lucked out this time. Normally, an expert of Silver's standards would not even consider this type of mission. Now, it's just a matter of whether OSC will pay to hire Silver. This fella named Black Flame really is unlucky. He has actually caught Silver's attention. Not even heaven can save him, Pleiades said sympathetically. The Flower of Seven Sins missions were divided into several levels. Experts within the organization were similarly ranked. An expert like himself only ranked at the intermediate level, whereas Silver was a peak expert in the Flower of Seven Sins. An expert like Silver dealing with Black Flame was simply a waste of time. As Pleiades and Accurate 9 occupied themselves with their conversation, one of Starmoon City's first-rate guilds, the Star Alliance, had officially declared war against Zero Wing, announcing their intentions to seize Stone Forest Town. This news spread quickly throughout Starmoon Kingdom. The Stone Claw Mountains outer region. A 500-man team ravaged a half-orc settlement. A settlement typically contained lord-ranked half-orcs. A powerful settlement might even house 3 or 4 lords. 10 or more chieftain-ranked half-orcs usually patrolled the area as well. In this half-orc settlement, there were a total of 3 half-orc lords and 17 half-orc chieftains. However, against this team of 500 players, they could not offer any form of resistance. Currently, almost all of the settlement's half-orcs were already dead. Only one level 38 half-orc lord continued to resist desperately. In the end, however, a silver-armored female berserker still claimed its life. Snow, something has happened with the Star Alliance, Zhao Yueru, who wore a purple-red robe, suddenly reported. A moment ago, the Star Alliance declared war against Zero Wing and sent many of their elites to deal with Zero Wing's members. In the end, the Star Alliance's elders had been mesmerized by the money that OSC offered, Gentle Snow said, laughing lightly. Although I do not know what kind of hidden cards the Star Alliance possesses, this is a good opportunity for us. Contact our other members immediately. Tell them that Ouroboros is going to declare war against the Star Alliance as well. Shortly after, more shocking news spread throughout Starmoon City. The 2 first-rate guilds of Starmoon City were finally going to take action. This war would be unlike the previous small skirmishes. This time, both guilds would face each other head-on. In the future, whenever the members of either guild encounter each other, only one would walk away. Despite a storm currently brewing in Starmoon City, Feng was oblivious. System: Quest Solomon's Treasure completed. Quest rewards: 10 million EXP, 20 free mastery points, and 1 completely random treasure chest. After the system notification faded, Feng's experience bar increased by a small chunk. A wooden treasure chest emitting a purple glow appeared inside his bag. Completely random treasure chest. May contain a reward or a punishment. Disappears after 5 uses. Isn't this the disaster treasure chest? Feng was suddenly speechless as he stared at the dazzling treasure chest inside his bag. Completely random treasure chest was the name the system gave. The players who were familiar with the treasure chest, however, had another name for it: the disaster treasure chest. 9 out of 10 times, opening the completely random treasure chest resulted in a punishment. Moreover, the punishments were relatively severe. The punishments ranged from losing 1 or more levels to losing some attributes permanently. Some punishments even prevented players from gaining any EXP or reduced their attack power for many days. Hence, it gained the name Disaster Treasure Chest. Of course, if players obtained a reward, they deserved a celebration. In the past, many players had bragged on the forums about the rewards they had obtained. There were players who had actually gained an epic item from the random treasure chest, while some had obtained a complete dark gold set equipment. Others had been rewarded a top-tier mount. To put it simply, the rewards the treasure chest provided were extremely tempting. Reward and punishment, it was up to players to decide if the risk was worth it. To Feng, however, the potential benefits were greater than the risks. A player's luck attribute greatly affected the outcome of their draws. Even if Feng opened a punishment, due to his luck attribute, it was possible that the punishment would be light. Currently, Zero Wing faced the threat of the Flower of Seven Sins. Hence, it was of utmost importance that he grow stronger. Naturally, Feng would not let go of this perfect opportunity to improve his strength. Not to mention his chances of obtaining a reward were much higher than others. Hopefully I'll draw something good. Feng then activated Divine Providence and stretched out his hand to open the disaster treasure chest. Chapter 707, God Sword. As Feng gradually opened the treasure chest, a golden ray of light escaped from the wooden box. Wah! The golden light merged with Feng's body. Feng immediately felt a renewed and improved strength, his accumulated fatigue weakening significantly. System: completely random treasure chest has been activated. Rewarding 10 points to hidden attribute, Fortitude. A hidden attribute as a reward. I've lucked out this time, Feng muttered as he clenched his fists. He could feel his fatigue lessening. Fortitude was the most important attribute among the 4 great hidden attributes. Hidden attributes would not increase a player's damage. Similarly, it would not decrease the damage a player received. However, they were far more useful than basic attributes. Unfortunately, hidden attributes would not increase with a player's level. They would only increase through special means. Meanwhile, Fortitude was somewhat similar to a monster's mana body. First, it decreased the impact external injuries had on a player's combat power. The second effect was to decrease stamina and concentration consumption during battle, allowing players to fight for longer periods. Third, it reduced the impact stamina and concentration depletion had on a player's combat power. Due to these 3 major effects, players thirsted for the Fortitude attribute. It was especially true for experts. Expert players normally incorporated certain combat techniques during battle. These combat techniques placed a heavy burden on their stamina and concentration. Take void steps for example. Although the burden on Feng's stamina was minimal, it was a massive burden on his concentration. Hence, Feng had to limit how often he used the technique in his fights. If a player's fortitude was sufficiently high, they could use such combat techniques far more often. In turn, this would improve their chances of victory. In addition, against high-tiered monsters such as a Grand Lord or monsters that possessed special skills that could reduce a person's stamina and concentration, fortitude was a severe advantage. In the past, there had been a Tier 5 player that had become famous due his monstrously high fortitude. Berserker Saint Broken Flow. Due to his extraordinarily high fortitude, he opted to fight battles of mutual destruction. With such tactics, Broken Flow had even defeated those whose strength and techniques were superior to his. As a result, Broken Flow had become one of the 12 sacred berserkers. As God's domain was still in its initial stages, it was extremely difficult to obtain the fortitude attribute with players' low levels. Even Feng did not know of any good methods to gain the hidden attribute at his level. Normally, players would only begin to encounter the hidden attribute after level 50. Moreover, of the methods and quests Feng knew, the majority only rewarded 1 or 2 points of fortitude. The fact that he had managed to obtain 10 points now had saved him plenty of time and effort. Hence, Feng was quite satisfied. With how he had profited from opening the disaster treasure chest for the first time, Feng quickly proceeded to open it a second time. The second time he opened the treasure chest, he obtained the Tier 3 magic scroll, Thunder's Wrath. It was a Tier 3 large-scale destruction spell and covered an area of 100 yards. The third time Feng opened the treasure chest, a black beam struck him, and his agility attribute permanently decreased by 25 points. To ordinary players, a 25 agility point loss was massive. Even after obtaining their Tier 1 classes, they would have to level up 3 times to make up lost points. To Feng, however, the loss was acceptable. The Abyssal Blade already provided with an additional 2 free attribute points each time he leveled up. In addition to the Golden Stigmata, a loss of 25 agility would not affect him too badly. When players reached Tier 2, the amount of free attribute points they obtained with each level up increased to 20. At that time it would be easy to make up for this loss. There were also plenty of tools that could permanently increase a player's attributes. In fact, Feng knew of a few that were relatively easy to obtain. Moreover, he had already obtained 10 fortitude and a Tier 3 large-scale destruction spell. Those 2 were more than enough to make up for this meager setback. When Feng opened the completely random treasure chest for the 4th time, he was struck by a purple beam. System: you have been cursed. EXP gained from killing monsters decreased by 70% for 10 days. Fortunately, I still have plenty of options to level up. Feng frowned slightly as he saw his new punishment. Very quickly, however, he dispelled the disappointment from his mind as he muttered, "With 2 punishments in a row, let the last be a reward." Feng then opened the treasure chest for the final time. This time, a purple-red potion appeared inside the wooden box. Dragon Slayer Potion, consumable. Increases all attributes by 100% and all resistances by 100 points for 1 minute. Cooldown, 3 hours. This potion is insane. Feng could not help his shock. In Feng's memories, the best potion he had ever seen only increased a player's main attribute by 100% and offered a small amount of magic resistance. The Dragon Slayer potion, however, actually increased all attributes by 100%. This was, by far, the most intense attribute increase Feng had ever seen a potion offer. Even the effects of the Heavenly Dragon's Breath's activatable skill, Heavenly Dragon's Power, could not compare to this. If he drank this potion, it would be the equivalent of wearing an additional legendary item. He could challenge opponents of a higher tier. Unfortunately, the treasure chest only rewarded 1 Dragon Slayer potion. If he could produce more, the Flower of 7 Sins would be no more than a flea to 0 wing. After using all 5 draws, the completely random treasure chest disappeared. Feng then stored the Dragon Slayer potion away and took out Solomon's treasure to begin sorting through the information he had gained regarding Solomon's sword. After using an ancient document, the information that flowed into the user's mind only offered a general summary, whereas the detailed information was recorded inside the ancient document. After Feng studied the information for several hours, he finally understood how he could obtain one of God's domain's 10 great legendary weapons, Solomon's sword. The complete Solomon's sword had long since disappeared. It had been shattered during the Great Destruction. Solomon's sword broke into 5 fragments and had been scattered throughout God's domain. Later, different people had found each of these fragments. These people had recast the shattered fragments to form new weapons. Each of these new weapons contained an immense power. However, due to the passage of time, the inhabitants of God's domain had forgotten about Solomon's sword. Instead, these 5 weapons had shaken God's domain with their might, their names passed down by the common populace. As the fragments of Solomon's sword had not been equal, the might of the new weapons differed from each other. Among the created weapons, the most famous was the 3rd-ranking sword on God's domain's famed swords list, Broken Steel. Broken Steel was leagues stronger than Feng's Abyssal Blade. There is no need to think about Broken Steel right now. With my current strength and level, it is impossible to obtain. I can only approach it slowly. Feng was extremely familiar with Broken Steel. However, he could not go after it right now. In the past, among the 12 sacred swordsmen, the number 1 sword saint used none other than Broken Steel. Feng had also witnessed the sword's might personally. Although it was not a legendary weapon, its attributes and skills were not much weaker than a legendary weapon. If he could obtain Broken Steel in this life, his strength would soar to unspeakable heights. Chapter 708, 5 Clues. As the most powerful sword among the weapons recreated from the fragments of Solomon's sword, Broken Steel was, naturally, the most difficult to obtain among the 5 weapons. Even if Feng wanted the challenge of obtaining it right now, only death would await him. Feng carefully researched the 5 clues. Among the 5 recreated weapons, 3 could not be obtained before reaching level 100. He could only attempt to find 2 while he was below level 100. Among these 2 weapons, the easiest was located at the top of the world. Dragon's Maw? Feng fell into deep thought when he realized where the clue led him. The Dragon's Maw was one of the regional maps found at the top of the world. It was a level 60 map. However, the area was far more dangerous than any ordinary level 60 map. Based on what Feng had heard about the Dragon's Maw, the map had even claimed the lives of many Tier 4 players. Moreover, they had died tragically. Not only had they lost some EXP and a piece of equipment, but they also permanently lost basic attributes upon death. Even Feng wasn't sure how much they had lost exactly. However, the fact that a level 60 map had even caused the deaths of Tier 4 players was more than a little intimidating. The Dragon's Maw was only a short distance from Mount Sogar. Feng only needed to travel across 2 leveling areas. If he left the blood refining passage, he could reach the map quickly. However, with his current strength, he was more than 90% certain that he would die there. Feng did not particularly mind dying. However, the risk of losing attributes outweighed the gains. If he wished to increase his chances of obtaining the weapon hidden in the Dragon's Maw, the best option was to go there after reaching level 50 and completing his class change. Fortunately, he didn't have to worry about someone else claiming the weapon before him. If one wished to travel to the top of the world through normal means, they would need the strength of a Tier 4 class at the very minimum. Unless, of course, they possessed a Tier 4 position teleportation scroll. However, such an item was extremely rare. A second Tier 4 magic scroll would most likely not appear in God's domain for a long time. Hence, the chances of players reaching the Dragon's Maw were practically non-existent. Just as Feng prepared to leave the blood refining passage and grind monsters nearby, he suddenly heard the sound of a system warning. What? I've used up the nutrient solution already? Didn't I just replace it yesterday? This sound was very familiar to Feng. If the nutrient solution were about to run out, the system would warn him. But it's already 4 in the afternoon right now. I should log out and get some rest. Feng had spent practically all of his time killing blood fighters in the blood refining passage. He had not logged out to train or relax. Now that he had completed his quest, this was a good time for him to take a break. Having made his decision, Feng logged out of God's domain. Inside the luxurious bedroom, the lid of the pure white virtual gaming cabin slowly lifted. Feng emerged. The sun illuminated his room, shining on a wide array of modern electronic smart devices displayed before Feng. As the Big Dipper Training Center's luxury villa, an ordinary apartment could never compare to the Greenwater Villa. Artificial intelligence managed the rooms, and whatever Feng wanted done, he only needed to issue the command, and the villa's AI would complete the task. It was an extremely convenient place to live. After exiting the virtual gaming cabin, Feng felt an indescribable physical weakness. Sure enough, I exhausted myself during my fight with the Blood Warrior. Feng smiled bitterly. Although he had always focused on improving his brain's activity, it was simply too difficult to get his hands on S-rank nutrient fluids. Even if he were the one providing the money, Big Dipper could only procure a limited quantity. To nurture Fire Dance and the others, he kept only 5 bottles for himself. Hence, he would use them conservatively. This was the reason that he did not use void steps unless absolutely necessary. However, this quest had been very important. If he had been unable to defeat the blood refining warrior, he would not have obtained the ancient document or discovered Solomon's sword's whereabouts. Following which, Feng drank 2 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid before he recovered from his weakened state. S-rank nutrient fluids really are impressive. It's unfortunate that even Big Dipper can't obtain more in a short time. Otherwise, if I had a large supply, I could push Fire Dance and the others into the refinement realm quickly. Feng sighed with disappointment. Both Fire Dance and Violet Cloud had long since set half a foot into the refinement realm. However, neither could break past the final hurdle, entering the new world. Otherwise, with Fire Dance and Violet Cloud's equipment, their combat power could rank among the top 5 experts throughout Starmoon Kingdom. There were many expert players in God's domain. Neither the Red List nor the God's Domain Experts list could take into account every expert in Starmoon Kingdom. Among these experts, many were still unknown, hiding frightening combat power. Take the members of Midnight Tea Party for example. In the past, during God's Domain's early stages, the majority of the independent team's members had been unknown existences. However, every one of them possessed astonishing strength. Only their goals differed from other players, so they had never bothered to make themselves known to the public. However, with Fire Dance and Violet Cloud's equipment advantage, there was a very high possibility that they would rank among the top 5 in the kingdom once they reached the refinement realm. Just as Feng was about to head to the gym to train, his quantum watch rang as his class's female monitor, Zhao Ruoshi, called. Zhao Ruoshi's smiling face appeared on the screen. With a cold voice she asked, Feng, do you remember what today is? Feng was about to ask, but after hearing Zhao Ruoshi's tone, he immediately came to a realization. He had previously agreed to attend Zhao Ruoshi's birthday party. However, due to God's domain, he had completely forgotten about the event. Although Zhao Ruoshi wore a warm and elegant smile, Feng knew how angry his classmate actually was. As if she had known that Feng would forget about her birthday, Zhao Ruoshi sighed as she said, "My car is parked outside the villa. You have 30 minutes. I'll be right there." Feng hurriedly began to tidy himself. Roughly 10 minutes later, Feng emerged from the Greenwater Villa. Zhao Ruoshi wore a navy blue dress and a pure white ribbon atop her head. Her long silky hair swept down to her waist, her prideful figure even rivaling gentle snows in God's domain. As she stood beside her luxury sports car, Passers-by could not help but turn to look at her. Who is that? She's so beautiful. She's even more beautiful than our school's beauty. I wonder who she's waiting for? Some of the men training at the Big Dipper Training Center drooled as they stared at Zhao Ruoxi. However, as this was the Greenwater Villa, the person living here was definitely someone extraordinary. Hence, the most they did was look, none of them daring to approach Zhao Ruoxi. You're finally here. Get in. Zhao Ruoxi, who had initially worn a displeased expression, revealed a happy smile when she saw Feng. Hurry up. We should still be able to make it in time if we leave now. What's the rush? Isn't the party at 6? Feng asked curiously. You'll understand once you get there. Zhao Ruoxi revealed a proud smile. Pretending to be mysterious, she said, however, when the time comes, you'll definitely be shocked. Shocked, huh? Feng simply smiled in response, no longer probing the matter as he slid into the car. Zhao Ruoxi then stomped on the accelerator, her sports car rolling up a cloud of smoke as it left the Greenwater Villa. Chapter 709, Birthday Party. High-rise buildings loomed over the bustling downtown streets. However, there were two buildings that stood out from the rest, a pair of twin towers that were over 300 stories tall. The twin towers shone like the city's emperors, overlooking all life inside the city limits. These towers had long since become one of the symbols of Jianghu City. At the same time, the twin towers were also Jianghu City's famous six-star hotel, the Blue Ocean Horizon. Having a meal or staying a night in this hotel cost more than a month's salary for an ordinary office worker. Normally, only Jianghu City's big shots could afford to dine or rest here. Ordinary people could only watch from far away. Zhao Ruoxi was the Zhao Group's princess. The Zhao Group's influence in Jianghu City was massive. Their yearly income was astounding. Furthermore, they were one of the Blue Ocean Horizon's major shareholders. Zhao Ruoxi stopped her car in front of the Blue Ocean Horizon's entrance. Immediately, 4 valets came up and opened the driver's door respectfully. When Zhao Ruoxi exited her car, the 4 valets were momentarily mesmerized. However, they very quickly snapped out of their daze. Not only was Zhao Ruoxi an absolute beauty, but she also arrived in an impressively luxurious car. There was no doubt that her identity was extraordinary. She also exuded a noble aura. She was definitely out of their lowly reach. Meanwhile, Feng, who emerged from the other side of the car, similarly shocked the 4 valets, though in an entirely different way. As the Blue Ocean Horizon's valets, they had seen all sorts of people. Hence, they were quite confident of their judgment, particularly of a person's attire. Although Feng wore a very fitting suit, based on the suit's design and fabric, they could immediately tell that it was nothing special. The suit was far below the Blue Ocean Horizon standards. Is he a bodyguard? The 4 valets wondered. However, they were surprised when Zhao Ruoxi slid her arm into Feng's as they made their way into the hotel. The valets' eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. All 4 were utterly dumbfounded. After entering the Blue Ocean Horizon, Zhao Ruoxi led Feng to the hotel's top floor. There, one could view Jianghu City in its entirety. The sight was breathtaking. Many people already mingled inside the large, magnificent banquet hall. They were all famous figures and held influential positions within the city. Normally, it would be difficult to meet even one of them. Today, however, so many of these powerful figures had gathered here. One could just imagine how much influence the Zhao Group possessed. Is that the young lady of the Zhao Group? A handsome young man in a white suit could not help but shift his gaze towards Zhao Ruoxi, who had just entered the hall. Unconsciously, he muttered, "If I can marry her, I won't have to lift a finger for the next 100 years. You?" Lan Hailong, who was dressed in a black high-class suit, shook his head. Smirking, he said, "Duan Xianglin, you don't recognize the man beside the young lady, do you? Looking at how he's dressed and his peasant-like temperament, do you think he could be a challenge for a prince of a major financial group like myself?" The youth named Duan Xianglin asked disdainfully. Although the Duan Group could not compare to the Zhao Group, it was still one of the top-ranking financial firms in Jianghu City. If he wanted to, a group of beautiful women would flock to him with a wave of his hand. How could a lucky peasant possibly be a match for him? Moreover, even if Zhao Ruoxi had taken a liking to the brat, the Zhao Group would never agree to the match. I guess it's expected that you don't know. After all, you only recently returned to the city. The man beside Miss Zhao is Feng. He is the martial arts master who is currently in charge of the Big Dipper Training Center. Duan Xianglin suddenly fell silent. Although he doubted the claim, Lan Hailong was a good friend of his. He had no reason to lie to him. Moreover, there was no point to such a lie, as the truth would come to light with a little investigation. If Feng had become an internal force expert at such a young age, it would not be surprising if he became a top-level international fighter in the future. They were currently living in the age of combat. The reputation and status an international fighter possessed were immense, and even an existence like the Zhao group wanted to fawn over them, not to mention a small financial group. Lan Hailong had a complex look in his eyes as he watched Feng enter the banquet hall. Not too long ago, Feng had merely been a minor character, yet the youth had become someone who even he looked up to. However, Lan Hailong did not look up to Feng due to his title as a martial arts master, but due to Zero Wing. Among everyone present, only Lan Hailong truly knew how amazing Feng was. Currently, God's domain's popularity grew by the day, with major corporations investing in the game with fervor. One could already imagine what kind of future the game would offer its experts. Although the Shadow Guild under his control had developed fairly well so far, compared to Zero Wing, Shadow was a joke. Shadow was just one of the many guilds in White River City. However, Zero Wing had become the city's absolute overlord. Even Stone Forest Town, which every guild in Star Moon Kingdom lusted after, had fallen under Zero Wing's control. The Stoneclaw Mountains were Zero Wing's backyard. If Zero Wing continued developing at this rate, it might even be possible for the upstart guild to become Star Moon Kingdom's overlord. The guild's influence at that time could easily be surmised with one word: frightening. Meanwhile, Lan Hailong had heard that Feng had become one of Zero Wing's upper echelons. Hence, how could he possibly not be impressed? It would have been awesome had I managed to form a close relationship with him. It is all that foolish Ling Feilong's fault. He made me lose such a perfect opportunity. Even now, Lan Hailong grew angry whenever he thought about Ling Feilong. However, he had long since banished Ling Feilong from Shadow Workshop, severing all ties with the foolish bastard. Otherwise, in the off-chance Ling Feilong managed to provoke Feng, he would cry himself to death if Feng mobilized Zero Wing to deal with Shadow. Inside one of the luxurious rooms on the top-floor banquet hall, two middle-aged men conversed quietly. One wore a silvery gray suit, while the other wore a set of white robes. When Zhao Ruashi entered the room with Feng, the two men ended their conversation immediately and shifted their gazes towards Feng. "Old Zhao, this must be the little brat you've been talking about, right? Indeed, I am impressed." The white-robed man could not help but utter words of praise after giving Feng a rough evaluation. Zhao Jianhua, who wore the silver suit, said happily, "Of course. Didn't I say that Ruashi's foresight is much better than mine?" "Second uncle." A faint blush appeared on Zhao Ruashi's cheeks. Hurriedly explaining, she said, "It's not what you think." I get it, Zhao Jianhua nodded, giving his niece an understanding look. While Zhao Jianhua poked fun at Zhao Ruashi, Feng focused his attention on the middle-aged man beside Zhao Jianhua. Feng could feel the aura of a martial artist coming off of this man. However, his aura was different from that of experts like Lei Bao. Standing before this white-robed man, Feng felt as if this man's aura dominated the room. It felt as if the white-robed man were the ruler of this space. A domain? Feng could not help his shock. However, he quickly denied this thought. "No, that's not right. This isn't a domain. Having a domain is like forming a separate world around oneself. Owners of domains have absolute control within their domains. These existences can no longer be considered human. The danger they give off is also on a whole different level." Although the white-robed man before him was not as powerful as Martial Dragon, he was not far from achieving a domain either. Just who was this? Feng wondered as he watched the white-robed man before him. There were extremely few internal force experts in the world. However, looking at the man before him, Feng judged that not only was he an internal force expert, but he was also a monster who was close to grasping a domain. Such a character had actually appeared in a small place like Jinhai City. It was truly inconceivable. Chapter 710, The Mysterious Feng. Ever since Feng's brain activity had improved, his senses had become extraordinarily sharp. The white-robed man before him hid his strength very well. Currently, he felt like the quiet ocean that would accommodate everything. He felt comfortable to be around. In front of this man, Feng could not find it in himself to generate any hostility at all. However, it was precisely because of this that Feng was afraid of him. He had honed his senses through countless life and death battles in God's domain. Particularly after his brain activity had improved, it had become a lot harder for others to put his mind at ease. However, the white-robed man's every action easily slipped through his warning senses. If the man before him suddenly decided to strike, the consequences would be dire. Young man, you are really impressive. You have actually become one of Zero Wing's upper echelons at such a young age. Sure enough, Zero Wing has hidden itself quite deeply, the white-robed man said in a very friendly tone as he smiled at Feng. Alright. I haven't introduced myself. I'm Yuan Tiexin, an elder of the secret pavilion. Feng, haven't you been playing God's domain for some time? Uncle Yuan is an expert of the virtual gaming world's older generation. Although he might not be a match for you in real life in virtual reality games, he might be even more powerful than you. This is a good chance to ask him for some guidance, Zhao Ruoxi said, her lips unconsciously curling into a smile when she saw Feng's surprised expression. Before this, Feng had maintained a calm composure. He had always been the one to hold the initiative. Now that she watched something fluster Feng, she could not help but feel a little proud of herself. Feng was speechless when he saw Zhao Ruoxi's joyous look. Yuan Tiexin was a hidden expert in the truest sense of the word. Both in fighting and gaming, the middle-aged man was far above him. It was a fact that he had played God's domain for more than a decade now. However, one's superiority was not determined by the amount of time one played God's domain. Otherwise, there would not have been so many players stuck at Tier 2, unable to advance to Tier 3, even after 10 years. One also had to take into account aspects such as opportunity, talent, and luck. For example, most people would live out their lives in obscurity. Some would spend only a few years to reach astounding heights that others would never touch throughout their entire lives. God's domain was similar in this manner. Feng was not so arrogant as to think that he was invincible in God's domain. He had only utilized his memories to obtain certain opportunities. Little girl, you speak too highly of me. Young man, I was only interested in meeting you after hearing Ruoxi say that she'd bring someone promising, one of Zero Wing's upper echelons. To suggest asking me for guidance. I'm not that amazing of a person. You can just call me Uncle Yuan, Yuan Tiexin said, chuckling as he shook his head. Let's have a seat before we continue our chat. Although Yuan Tiexin had spoken casually, Feng did not dare to be careless around the man. The secret pavilion was not just any guild. It was an existence that everyone in the virtual gaming world knew. The secret pavilion specialized in collecting and selling information on the major powers of various games. The secret pavilion ability to compile the God's domain experts list showed how skilled it was in gathering information. Uncle Yuan, you've constantly talked about Feng's status in Zero Wing. Is Zero Wing an amazing guild? Zhao Ruoxi asked curiously. Zhao Jianhua was also curious. Yuan Tiexin had mentioned Zero Wing multiple times now and had even praised Feng's potential. After knowing Yuan Tiexin for so long, this was the first time he had seen the man react in such a way. Although he did not have much contact with virtual reality games, he knew that Yuan Tiexin's status in the virtual gaming world was quite high. Particularly after God's domain became popular, Yuan Tiexin's status had grown with it. Many major international corporations had tried to contact Yuan Tiexin, some going as far as fawning over him. Although their Zhao group possessed some status and wealth in Jinhai City, they were nothing compared to those major international corporations. They were not even on the same level. Yet, such powers fawned over Yuan Tiexin. Although this was Zhao Ruoxi's birthday party, Zhao Jianhua had been surprised that he had convinced Yuan Tiexin to attend. Zhao Jianhua knew Yuan Tiexin's itinerary. Today he should be meeting with the upper echelons of a major international corporation, yet he had come here instead. The man had not attended out of respect for Zhao Jianhua either. He had joined them today to meet Feng. Thinking up to this point, Zhao Jianhua could not help but inwardly sigh. However, he was also pleased. You two might not know this since you don't play God's domain, but Zero Wing is a very popular guild in the virtual gaming world. It has caught the attention of various parties. Based on my understanding, even Open Source Corporation has set its eyes on Zero Wing, going so far as to offer a high price to purchase some of the guild's shares. However, Zero Wing had rejected OSC, Yuan Tiexin exclaimed. Open Source Corporation? The Open Source Corporation which focuses on trading new energy? Zhao Jianhua did not dare believe it to be true. Hence, he wanted to confirm if the Open Source Corporation Yuan Tiexin mentioned was the major corporation that he knew. Yes. I was quite shocked when I received the news. I never thought that the youngsters these days would act so impulsively. There are countless guilds hoping to gain OSC's financial support. This is my first time hearing of someone actually refusing OSC's offer. Yuan Tiexing nodded. Chuckling, he said, I've come here for 2 reasons. First, I wanted to see Ruashi. Second, I wanted to meet this upper echelon of Zero Wing that I've heard so much about in the hopes that I can arrange a meeting with the incomparably mysterious guild leader, Black Flame. I wonder if I can have the honor? Zhao Jianhua and Zhao Ruashi were dumbfounded when they heard Yuan Tiexiang's words. They shifted their gaze towards Shi Feng. Rejecting open-source corporations' investment was shocking enough. They had never imagined that Yuan Tiexiang had actually come here in person to obtain Shi Feng's help. For a moment, both Zhao Jianhua and Zhao Ruashi's minds were blank. However, as the person of interest, Shi Feng wore a calm expression as he said, Since Uncle Yuan wishes to meet my guild leader, I will try my best to get in touch with him for you. However, the guild leader has always been a busy man. I cannot guarantee that he will be willing to meet with you. I hope that Uncle Yuan can forgive me. Certainly. I also hope you will pass on a message to guild leader Black Flame for me. The Flower of 7 Sins has begun to act, Yuan Tiexiang said very confidently. I believe that once guild leader Black Flame receives this information, he will accept my request. When Shi Feng heard the news of the Flower of 7 Sins taking action, his heart involuntarily shuddered, a serious expression appearing on his face. The secret pavilion had obtained this information. There was no need to question its authenticity. Since Yuan Tiexiang had reported that the Flower of 7 Sins was on the move, it meant that Exemplary Willow was willing to pay the Flower of 7 Sins price. Aqua Rose had already told him that the guild's upper echelons were rapidly growing stronger. At this moment, 3 of them had reached the 8th floor and 7 people had reached the 7th floor. As for everyone else, they were all at the late stage of the 6th floor. The Flower of 7 Sins price was undoubtedly astronomical. Has that woman lost her mind? No matter how Shi Feng thought about it, this was not a worthy trade-off. Unless... Chapter 711, A Violent Dragon Set. After the birthday party ended, Shi Feng immediately returned to the Greenwater Villa and logged back into God's domain. Yuan Tiexiang had already made himself very clear with his words. If Shi Feng wished to find out more about the Flower of 7 Sins, then it would be best if he contacted the man. Since the Flower of 7 Sins had already started taking action, then what he needed to do right now was prepare for the upcoming battle. If he had information on the exact movements of the organization, at the very least, he would not be caught off guard. The Flower of 7 Sins had yet to fail at a job. If the organization truly managed to annihilate Zero Wing's upper echelon, it would deal an irrecoverable blow to the guild, especially now that the Star Alliance had declared all-out war on Zero Wing. In fact, during the time Shi Feng was at the party, many battles between the 2 guilds had occurred both inside and outside the Stoneclaw Mountains. Fortunately, though both sides had suffered losses, Zero Wing had the upper hand since it also had help from Ouroboros. Even so, the situation was not looking too good, as the Star Alliance also had many red names and workshops on its side. This situation prevented the members of Zero Wing from focusing on grinding at the Stoneclaw Mountains. On the sidelines, other guilds were quietly eyeing Zero Wing as well. If this situation dragged on, it would be extremely detrimental towards the level and equipment of Zero Wing's members. On top of that, if Zero Wing's upper echelon were to suffer complete annihilation, the blow to the guild would be fatal. Then, the various guilds grinding at the Stoneclaw Mountains would definitely have designs on Stone Forest Town. At that time, if these guilds were to band together with the Star Alliance to deal with Zero Wing, Shi Feng did not wish to see such a situation take place. When Shi Feng logged back into God's domain once more, he had already been teleported out of the blood refining passage, appearing at the foot of Mount Sogar. He immediately opened his friends list and chose to add a friend. Shi Feng had set his friends list so that it was shielded, which prevented others from adding him as a friend. As for messages and calls, his settings automatically rejected those from strangers. Hence, other than his friends, nobody had any way of contacting him. Yuan Tiexiang had told Shi Feng that his God's domain ID was Grilled Ironheart. Currently, Shi Feng was using his identity as Black Flame to add Yuan Tiexiang as a friend. As long as Yuan Tiexiang agreed to the friend request, the middle-aged man would be able to contact Shi Feng right away. Less than 5 minutes after Shi Feng sent out the friend request, the system notified him that Grilled Ironheart had agreed to become his friend. It really has been difficult for the secret pavilion to get in touch with you, Guild Leader Black Flame. Since Guild Leader Black Flame has taken the initiative to contact me, then you must be very interested in the information regarding the Flower of Seven Sins, Yuan Tiexin said slowly. Guild Leader Black Flame, you should know that the secret pavilion thrives on trading information. If you wish to obtain information on something, then you have to pay an appropriate price for it. I believe Guild Leader Black Flame should understand this point, right? I understand what you are trying to say. Without a doubt, you guys must be aiming for the magic crystals in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Yet, it also won't be so convenient for you to obtain them. Hence, seeing as you are trying to make contact with me at this time, you must be hoping to set up a foothold at Stone Forest Town, correct? Initially, Feng had felt it strange that a major character like Yuan Tiexin would appear at Zhao Ruoxi's birthday party. However, when the middle-aged man had brought up his wish to make contact with Black Flame, Feng immediately understood his goal. The magic crystal was an essential resource required for a player to develop in God's domain. Although the various kingdoms and empires around the continent also had their own regional dungeons that could produce magic crystals, these regional dungeons remained undiscovered. Moreover, even if some countries had activated their regional dungeons, the drop rate of magic crystals there could not compare to the Stoneclaw Mountains. The Stoneclaw Mountains was an Azura mode regional dungeon. A regional dungeon of such high difficulty would naturally have much better drop rates than other regional dungeons. Although the secret pavilion was quite a lofty existence in God's domain, it had yet to reach the standard of an omnipotent God. The secret pavilion might not have much need for coins, weapons and equipment, but it was a different story for magic crystals. After all, if they wished to maintain their status as a lofty existence, strength was still necessary. For example, the current Yuan Tiexin, whom Feng was looking at through the video chat, carried a flame-shaped shield and wore spiked scale armor. This spiked scale armor set was the Violent Dragon set, a level 30 dark gold set equipment meant for shield warriors. To obtain the entire set, one had to complete a series of high-level quests that was utterly impossible without a very powerful 100-man team. The difficulty of the quest was only slightly lower than the difficulty of raiding a 100-man team dungeon. One could just imagine how powerful the secret pavilion was. It should be known that Feng had relied on special means to clear a 100-man Hell Mode team dungeon. Otherwise, raiding the Hell Mode Frost Prison would have been utterly impossible. Guild Leader Black Flame is certainly amazing. That's right. The secret pavilion is indeed very interested in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Hence, we hope to set up a guild residence at Stone Forest Town, Yuan Tiexin said laudatorily. Practically everyone within the secret pavilion was familiar with the name of Black Flame by now. As for why they were very familiar with it, it was not because Black Flame was the #1 expert of Starmoon Kingdom. Rather, it was because Black Flame had managed to kill one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's strongest fighters, Martial Dragon. Although he had the aid of a personal guard, that too could be considered a part of his own strength. Straight to the point, I see. I wonder what benefits can the secret pavilion bring to me then? Feng asked, smiling bitterly. In truth, letting the secret pavilion establish a guild residence in Stone Forest Town would not affect Feng in any way. The secret pavilion's home ground was not in Starmoon Kingdom. It would not have any conflicts of interest with Zero Wing. After all, Zero Wing was not yet strong enough to prevent others from entering the Stoneclaw Mountains. Moreover, if the secret pavilion invested in Stone Forest Town, Zero Wing could also earn some repair fees from the guild. However, even though there were no demerits, that did not mean he should let the secret pavilion enter Stone Forest Town for free. Guild Leader Black Flame can rest assured on this point. The secret pavilion can provide you with the general information regarding the Flower of Seven Sins hit list on Zero Wing and the assigned assassins. To know one's own strength and the enemies is the sure way to victory. I believe that, with this information, Guild Leader Black Flame will have a much easier time coping with the situation. Although Yuan Tiexin had said these words very casually, Feng's heart was already beating madly at this moment. Feng had never imagined that the secret pavilion was such a frightening existence. The Flower of Seven Sins was a very mysterious organization in the virtual gaming world. Its movements were kept even more of a secret from others. Yet, the secret pavilion was actually able to obtain such information. It was simply inconceivable. If I have this information with Zero Wing's current state, we should be able to cope with the assassinations of the Flower of Seven Sins. Feng had some knowledge regarding the jobs carried out by the Flower of Seven Sins. Normally, the organization would send out assassins according to the mission's difficulty. Unless it was absolutely necessary, the organization would not field an overwhelming force to complete a mission. Feng did not think that the Flower of Seven Sins would rank an upstart guild like Zero Wing that highly on their mission board. If he responded properly, Zero Wing had a definite chance of defeating the Flower of Seven Sins. If the Flower of Seven Sins failed a mission, they would drop it. Moreover, they would return only half of the remunerations paid. Unless, of course, someone spent more money to commission a new mission. At that time, however, the price would be more than double that of the first time. Feng did not believe that Open Source Corporation would be willing to spend that much money on commissioning another hit on Zero Wing. May I know Guild Leader Black Flame's thoughts on this? Yuan Tiexian asked, smiling. Chapter 712, 3 Realms of Refinement. Okay, I can agree to your conditions. However, aside from providing information on the assassins this time, you guys must also keep me updated on the latest developments of the Flower of Seven Sins. Feng put out another request after giving the situation some more thought. Since the secret pavilion was able to uncover the hit list and hit men, it would be an easy task for the guild to find out the specific time when the organization would take action. If he knew the general timing of when the Flower of Seven Sins was going to attack, he would have a better chance of laying a trap to deal with the organization's hit men. Combat in God's domain was not just limited to simple ambushes. There were various sorts of means one could use to deal with other players. Only, the mindset of current players was still confined to previous virtual reality games. This thinking held that only players could be used to deal with other players. In fact, one could also employ traps in PvP. As long as one knew the opponent's movements and then proceeded with setting up a trap at a fixed location, one could kill off their targets without even lifting a finger. Moreover, even if the trap could not finish off the target, one could still gain the initiative in the battle, placing their opponent in a disadvantageous position. Deal. As long as they make a move, I'll notify you of it immediately. However, even I will only be able to tell you the general time frame for when they take action. As for when and where exactly they are going to take action, those are far beyond the abilities of the secret pavilion. Yuan Tiexian agreed immediately, his voice filled with confidence and determination. He had long since guessed that Feng would ask for something like this. A short moment later, both parties signed a contract through the main god system. Feng would provide a location in Stone Forest Town for the secret pavilion to establish its guild residence, while the secret pavilion would provide Feng with reports relating to the Flower of Seven Sins movements against Zero Wing. After the contract was signed, Feng received the report he wanted from Yuan Tiexian almost immediately. Sure enough, he really is an old fox. After taking a look at the information, Feng found that the file included even the latest movements of the Flower of Seven Sins. Yuan Tiexian had obviously prepared this report long before their conversation. The middle-aged man had only been waiting for him to negotiate for it. However, Feng could not help but admit that the trade this time was very worthwhile. Even if he spent a large sum of credits to investigate the movements of the Flower of Seven Sins, it was unlikely he could come up with the information he wanted. Currently, the Flower of Seven Sins had yet to establish a permanent base of operations in God's domain. Moreover, the organization was not a guild. All its members were independent players, and every member of the organization was extremely mysterious. Just investigating one member would be an extremely complicated task, not to mention carrying out an investigation on the movements and strengths of the majority of the organization's members. Only a force like the Secret Pavilion could achieve such a feat. If not for the Secret Pavilion's interest in the Stoneclaw Mountains this time, Feng did not believe the Secret Pavilion would sell him this information even if he asked for it. After all, not only would the guild provoke the Flower of Seven Sins by doing so, but it would also expose some of the Secret Pavilion's capabilities. Guild Leader Black Flame, in celebration of our first successful cooperation, I will provide you with additional information. The major forces eyeing Zero Wing right now aren't limited to Open Source Corporation. Some have already begun taking action. While dealing with the Flower of Seven Sins, it is best to take additional precautions, Yuan Tiexian laughed. He then disconnected the call. Other major forces are participating in the struggle this time? Feng's expression suddenly grew serious. In the past, the Star Alliance had been the one that managed to obtain the Stoneclaw Mountains in the end. Back then, the average level of players was much higher. The Stoneclaw Mountains had also been mostly developed. Quite a number of regional dungeons that could produce magic crystals had also appeared in other kingdoms and empires. Hence, the various major forces of God's domain naturally would not bother going out of their way to lay claim to the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, things were different in this life. He had managed to obtain Stone Forest Town a lot earlier thanks to the special means he had employed. However, this had also resulted in a situation where obtaining Stone Forest Town was equivalent to claiming the Stoneclaw Mountains. It seems that I've gone a little overboard this time. Feng could not help laughing bitterly as he shook his head. However, if I didn't take the opportunity to obtain Stone Forest Town back then, doing so would have become much more difficult in the future. It also wouldn't have become the gold mine that it is right now. Forget it. Since things have already gotten to this point, I can only deal with the problems as they crop up. Thinking up to this point, Feng began analyzing the information supplied by the secret pavilion. Open Source Corporation really is going big this time. They're actually targeting the members of the main force as well. Feng involuntarily sucked in a breath of cold air after reading the report. The Flower of Seven Sins had a very high asking price. OSC had paid for 2 deaths for every member of Zero Wing's main force. Although that number was much lower than for Zero Wing's upper echelon, for whom OSC had paid for 10 deaths each, it would still weaken Zero Wing's main force significantly. But really though, the people from the Flower of Seven Sins are sure looking down on Zero Wing. They are actually sending less than 50 members to deal with us. Giving the list of assassins a glance, Feng could immediately tell how confident the Flower of Seven Sins was. They had not bothered relying on numbers at all. Although Secret Pavilion's information was not complete, judging from what was in the report, every one of these people could be considered a top-tier expert in God's domain. They all were level 33 and above, and even their most inferior equipment was level 30 fine gold set equipment. The Secret Pavilion really is powerful. They even have a general assessment of the combat standards of these people. After carefully looking through the Secret Pavilion's report, Feng gained a new understanding of the guild. The Secret Pavilion was simply terrifying. Compared to the level of detail in this report, the information the Secret Pavilion published on the God's Domain experts list was child's play. However, the Flower of Seven Sins was indeed as frightening as the rumors made it out to be. Of the assassins the organization sent, over 30 people had already set foot into the Refinement realm. No matter which guild these experts were in, they would surely rank among the top of the guild, yet the Flower of Seven Sins had actually managed to dispatch over 30 of such people. Among these 30-plus people, 7 had even managed to reach the next stage of the Refinement realm, the Flowing Water realm. However, the most powerful assassin sent by the Flower of Seven Sins was not one of those 7 Flowing Water realm experts. Instead, it was an expert who had reached an even further realm. The categorization of a player's combat power using combat standards such as the Refinement realm was a concept that had existed even before the launch of God's Domain. Moreover, it had existed for a very long time already, so the theoretical setup behind the concept had long since been perfected. The system was not unique to God's Domain. Only, God's Domain had made the concept of the Refinement realm known to the general public. Back then, Feng had learned of the combat realms dividing expert players only after coming in touch with God's Domain. There were a total of 3 realms of refinement: the Refinement realm, the Flowing Water realm, and the Void realm. Of these 3 realms, the latter was higher than the former. Meanwhile, only those who managed to enter the Refinement realm were considered true top-tier experts of God's Domain. Each one of these experts was capable of going up against an entire army of players by themselves. Meanwhile, above the realms of refinement would be the domain. However, the monsters that had managed to achieve a domain were as rare as a phoenix's feather. One such existence was Martial Dragon. If Feng had not relied on his attributes to suppress Martial Dragon back then, in addition to having the assistance of his personal guard Kite, defeating Martial Dragon would have been utterly impossible. Had the fight dragged on, Feng would have been the loser instead. Currently, although Feng still had the advantage in equipment, this advantage was continuously shrinking. It seems that this Void Realm expert has been prepared to deal with me? Feng could not help but inwardly guess. Even if he could successfully deal with his opponent, the other members of the guild. Chapter 713, Silver. Firewing Empire, Firewing Imperial Capital. Tiexin, were your negotiations successful? A white-browed youth wearing a pair of frosty robes asked, shifting his gaze towards Yuan Tiexin, who had just entered the room. Yuan Tiexin was one of the elders of the secret pavilion, his position within the guild very high. Moreover, he was already 50 years old this year. Yet, despite the white-browed youth directly calling Yuan Tiexin by his personal name, the latter did not show any signs of dissatisfaction. On the contrary, Yuan Tiexin carefully handed over the contract he signed with Feng to the youth in a very respectful manner and said seriously, "Just like guild leader has surmised, Black Flame was very incisive in making a decision. We can now begin constructing our guild residence at Stone Forest Town immediately." If Feng were here right now, he would definitely be shocked. After all, the secret pavilion's guild leader was actually a young man. "Ah, thanks for your hard work. Have Wen Yao bring the kids there, then. This time we can let those kids get a chance to widen their horizons a little." Ever since God's Domain's launch, the virtual gaming world has not been as nice a place to mingle around in as it had been. The white-browed youth took a glance at the contract and accepted it with satisfaction. He then turned to look at Yuan Tiexin, smiling as he asked, "Tiexin, just ask whatever is on your mind." Guild leader, the Flower of Seven Sins has already targeted Zero Wing. If we include those other people as well, there is simply no chance for Zero Wing to protect Stone Forest Town. Aren't we just making an unnecessary move with this? Yuan Tiexin could not help but ask. This can't really be considered an unnecessary move. I'm simply hoping to have Zero Wing test out the Flower of Seven Sins. If we can get the others to expose themselves as well, we will have profited in this exchange, the white-browed youth replied, laughing. He then took out a document and placed it before Yuan Tiexin, saying, "You'll know once you take a look at this." Yuan Tiexin was inwardly very confused at the youth's words. He promptly began flipping through the document. How could this be? Yuan Tiexin was shocked. That silver has appeared? Is there some sort of mistake here? Zero Wing is merely an upstart guild. Although that Black Flame indeed possesses some ability, it is not to the degree where it is necessary for Silver to take action, right? Whether Silver will be taking action personally or not, I am not sure. However, it is certain that he will be going with the group that's going to attack Zero Wing. If he is willing to take action, this will be the perfect opportunity for us to gather some information on him, the white-browed youth said, shaking his head. Silver was part of the upper echelon of the Flower of Seven Sins. Even for the secret pavilion, obtaining information on Silver was extraordinarily difficult. Meanwhile, a perfect opportunity to do so had just appeared before them, and he did not wish to let the others from the Flower of Seven Sins ruin this opportunity. If the other members of the Flower of Seven Sins defeated Zero Wing swiftly, then a superior like Silver would naturally not take action because Zero Wing simply did not possess this qualification. However, if Zero Wing could force the Flower of Seven Sins into a bitter battle, the possibility of Silver taking action would be much higher. Guild leader, can I go as well? Yuan Tiexin, who was usually calm and collected, currently had a hint of excitement in his eyes. Silver was an existence akin to a legend in the virtual gaming world. Every time he took action, he would cause an earth-shattering sensation. However, the people who knew of him were extremely few, as the various major powers would take the initiative to keep this information hidden, giving ordinary powers no chance to learn about Silver at all. Go if you want to, but don't arouse any suspicions. It will be best if you go in disguise, the white-browed youth replied. He then took out a dark gray ring with purple elvish words engraved on it, the ring itself giving off the glow effect unique to dark gold items. I understand. Yuan Tiexian's heart began beating madly when he heard the youth's words. He then picked up the ring and hurriedly left the guild leader's office. The top of the world, the Dragon's Maw. The Dragon's Maw was a map filled with steep and winding paths, and these paths extended down towards a bottomless crater. The crater looked just like a massive mouth that was trying to devour everything. At this moment, Feng was standing at the entrance of a small path, looking down at the sight before him. No wonder this place is called the Dragon's Maw. It's simply impossible to see the bottom of this crater from out here. Everywhere around this place is sending my alarm bells ringing. This really isn't a place for ordinary people. As Feng took a look at his surroundings, he could feel a premonition of death coming from all around the Dragon's Maw. Yet, strangely enough, he could not see any signs of danger here. There was not a single monster present within his field of vision. Nevertheless, his intuition was warning him that he might lose his life at any given moment, should he set foot on the path before him. This time, however, Feng had no choice but to ignore his intuition and step forward. the assassins from the Flower of Seven Sins possessed overwhelming strength. With a force of over 30 refinement experts, 7 flowing water experts and 1 void expert, who were all geared in level 30 top-tier equipment, not to mention killing Zero Wing's main force, the group could even attempt to kill a super guild's main force. In Zero Wing, aside from Feng himself being a flowing water expert, there was nobody else within the realms of refinement. Even with the advantage in attributes, Feng knew very clearly that Zero Wing's main force stood no chance at all against so many refinement experts. The outcome would be the same even if they had the power of darkness. After all, if even the members of Zero Wing's main force possessed berserk skills, how could it be possible for these refinement experts not to have obtained one for themselves? Even if not everyone from the Flower of Seven Sins had managed to get their hands on a berserk skill, as long as there were a few who had, these few people could easily annihilate Zero Wing's entire main force. Whether it was Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud, or Fire Dance, all 3 of these girls possessed massive potential. Unfortunately, having potential did not necessarily mean they were strong right now. If they had several years' time to grow. No, even if it were just half a year's time, if he properly guided them and helped them fully realize their potential, no doubt they would be able to cream these experts. However, there was simply not enough time right now. From the report of the secret pavilion, Feng knew that the Flower of Seven Sins was still in the process of making preparations, which might take anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Hence, it was highly possible for them to take action within these 3 to 5 days. However, he did not possess a method to improve everyone's strength significantly within such a short time span. The improvement of combat techniques required time and accumulation of experience, not to mention setting foot into the unfathomable realm of refinement. Despite Fire Dance and Violet Cloud being just a thread away from entering the refinement realm, no matter what they did, they were unable to achieve a breakthrough. Even Feng had no methods to assist them in breaking through. Otherwise, the refinement realm would not have become the great divide that differentiated ordinary experts from top-tier experts in God's domain. Even super guilds would find it very difficult to nurture a refinement expert. Although there was the option of bringing Fire Dance and the others to level up, the possible improvements through this method were limited. Within 4 or 5 days, the most he could do was help everyone in the main force gain 2 more levels. The first reason for this was because everyone was already high-leveled now. The amount of EXP they required to level up was a lot. The other reason was that, while he was capable of killing monsters that were many levels higher than himself, the others could not. At most, they could only serve as support. If the EXP of the monsters he killed were to be split among 100 players, the overall leveling speed of Zero Wing's main force would only be slightly faster than an ordinary expert's. Rather than doing such a futile action, Feng decided to go all out. Although Solomon's sword had been broken into 5 parts, even the weakest fragment could improve a person's strength to a very frightening degree. As long as he could obtain the weapon hidden inside the dragon's maw, it might be possible for him to pull off an upset in the upcoming battle with the Flower of Seven Sins. As Feng walked deeper into the crater along the small path, he used the magic amplification scroll once more to summon a level 52 tier 3 demon, to deal with unexpected situations. However, even after walking for more than 3 hours, Feng did not encounter a single monster. His surroundings were deathly silent. Occasionally he could also hear agonizing screams as if an invisible ghost were standing right beside him. Not wishing to waste too much time, Feng activated Wind Rider and quickly descended the path. Finally, after traveling for another 2 hours or so, he arrived at the bottom of the crater. Statues. At the dark bottom, Feng discovered many lifelike stone statues carved in the form of various creatures. Humans, elves, half-orcs, and many more. Every single one of these statues had an expression of horror on their faces. It was as if they had seen something extremely terrifying. Before Feng could further analyze these statues, the sounds of stone shattering entered his ears. He quickly shifted his eyes towards the source of the sounds, discovering more than a dozen black shadows moving about. These black shadows were tiny, roughly the size of an ordinary person's fist. However, their speed was horrifying. It was practically impossible for the naked eye to keep up with them. Most importantly, every single one of these shadows gave Feng a heavy sense of dread. Meanwhile, these black shadows were currently approaching Feng at lightning speed. Chapter 7:14, Engineering Tool. The floor of the crater was very dark. As a result, Feng was caught completely by surprise when the dozen or so shadows suddenly appeared. He did not have time to direct the Tier 3 demon to protect him. Seeing 3 fist-sized shadows fly straight at him, Feng immediately switched the 7 luminaries' rings aura of wind to the aura of earth and activated absolute defense. Suddenly, a pale yellow glow surrounded Feng's body. The black shadows created massive tremors when they crashed into the golden barrier. The powerful impact Feng sent flying more than 10 yards away. After receiving the bombardment, Feng managed to uncover the black shadow's true identity. Quartz Worm Special Elite. Level 60. HP 420, 000/420, 000. These quartz worms were made of black quartz crystals. In addition to their small bodies and astounding speed, they were extremely difficult to detect in this darkness. Although these special elites had low HP, their attack power was frighteningly high. So many quartz worms would even kill a Tier 2 player instantly. Fortunately, Feng had absolute defense. Even though these quartz worms were level 60 special elites, they could not break through the aura of Earth's activatable skill. However, as the seconds ticked by, more quartz worms started to appear. In the blink of an eye, nearly 60 quartz worms had surrounded Feng. He could not help but shiver as he felt the numerous beady, bright red eyes on him. These quartz worms gave Feng no opportunities to escape as they surrounded him and barraged him with a stream of attacks. As each second passed, Feng could hear several dozen crashes. It felt as if someone were firing an automatic rifle at him. Feng had no resistance to offer whatsoever. When absolute defense's duration came to an end, Feng would die. The quartz worms here could drown a player to death. Feng was relieved that he possessed a skill such as absolute defense. Otherwise, even if he came here after reaching level 50 and obtaining his Tier 2 class, death would be the only outcome awaiting him. With only 2 seconds remaining before absolute defense vanished, the Tier 3 demon standing a distance away began to chant an incantation, casting the Tier 3 spell, Oblivion Storm, over the area where Feng stood. Oblivion Storm was a Tier 3 large-scale destruction spell that had an effective area of 50 yards. It could easily envelop Feng and the quartz worms. Suddenly, a massive blue magic array appeared in the air. A massive tornado then descended from the magic array. They were all Feng and the quartz worms, sucked into the tornado and assaulted by countless wind blades from every direction. Immediately, the quartz worm's HP decreased at a rate visible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, the tornado sent Feng flying into the sky. The moment absolute defense's duration was about to end, Feng immediately stopped the Tier 3 demon from channeling its spell. Suddenly, the tornado vanished. Glancing at the quartz worms that were over 100 meters in the air, Feng realized that the special elites only had a small amount of HP remaining. The lower HP ones had around 10,000 to 20,000, while the higher HP worms had around 30,000 to 50,000. If Feng had not stopped the demon's spell, these quartz worms would have died. However, if Feng had not stopped the spell, he too would have died. Hovering in midair, both player and monsters, neither of which could fly, began to descend. Feng quickly activated gravity liberation, slowing his descent to less than 1/10 of his initial speed. At the same time, he directed the Tier 3 demon below to cast the Tier 3 spell, Scorching Gale, over his and the quartz worm's landing area. Scorching Gale was not a large-scale destruction spell. Rather, it was a cone AoE spell with a range of 20 yards. Not only had Oblivion Storm sent its targets into the air, but it also gathered them into a single area. Hence, Scorching Gale could easily envelop the landing zone. However, due to the difference in their speed of descent, the quartz worms had landed while Feng still floated down. Suddenly, the Tier 3 demon fired countless flame blades from its hands, the burning attack devouring the quartz worms. -104,189. -110,467. Damages over -100,000 appeared above the quartz worms. The low HP special elites could not endure the flaming assault. Only after Scorching Gale finished did Feng land. Loot and quartz worm corpses littered the ground. Meanwhile, Feng's experience bar rose rapidly. The quartz worms were level 60 special elites. Although the EXP they rewarded was less than what ordinary level 60 special elites offered, it was still a lot more than level 60 elites. Moreover, Feng was only level 35 right now. The bonus EXP he obtained from fighting monsters that were 25 levels higher than him was impressive. However, the bonus EXP one could obtain through killing monsters of a higher level was not without limit, capping at 20 levels. Hence, players' EXP would, at most, increase by 20 times. Even so, an increase of 20 times would still provide Feng with an exaggerated amount of EXP. After this brief battle, Feng had gone from 9% of level 35 to 98% of level 35. He was only 2% away from reaching level 36. At this level he could rank at the top of Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list. Currently, the number 1 player on Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list only approached level 35. They still needed to grind for half a day before crossing the threshold to level 35. This method of leveling isn't bad at all. Feng could not help his grin as he looked at the EXP he had obtained. Unfortunately, special elites were not easily discovered. Even in the Stoneclaw Mountains and Azura Mode regional dungeon, so many special elites would not appear at a single time. In a group of 100 elite monsters or so, roughly 8 or 9 special elites might tag along. Hence, it was nearly impossible to find large groups of special elites such as the quartz worms to grind on. Moreover, the Tier 3 Demon's Tier 3 spell, Oblivion Storm, had a relatively long cooldown of 70 minutes. Unfortunately, the demon did not have any other combination attack that could kill a group of level 60 special elites instantly. Most importantly, it would be very difficult for Feng to locate so many quartz worms again. After Feng had wiped out the wave of quartz worms, silence returned to the area. The only quartz worms in the area were the corpses on the ground. Although the quartz worms had not provided much EXP, the loot they dropped was relatively good. Moreover, Feng had the luck increasing Icarus's heart. The 60+ quartz worms had dropped quite a bit of level 50 or above bronze and mysterious iron equipment. The special elites had even dropped an engineering design. Glare bomb? Feng was delighted. One could produce many interesting items with engineering. However, very few engineering items could be used in combat. Take the frost grenade for example. Not only could it cause damage but it also possessed a control effect. Sadly, only master engineers could produce such items. Moreover, the designs were extremely difficult to obtain. Yet, if one tried to purchase these items, their prices were extraordinarily high. Ordinary players could not afford to use them. The glare bomb was not as advanced as the frost grenade. It could not inflict any damage. However, it was very easy to produce. The materials required were not particularly rare. Hence, it was one of the most common tools in field battles. The glare bomb could temporarily blind all creatures within its range, though its effect on players was reduced. After Feng finished arranging the loot and was about to leave the area, for some reason the external layer of stone on the statues began to fade, revealing these statues' original appearance. Every one of these restored individuals radiated a frightening aura. Feng felt an immense pressure from these creatures and was overcome by a desire to flee. However, these unpetrified individuals had noticed Feng. Chapter 7:15, Thunder Emperor. With the eyes of these revived individuals on him, Feng did not dare to make any sudden movements. Every one of these NPCs, be it human, elf, or half-orc, had an astounding and intimidating level. Level 150. Even a common monster at this level could kill Feng effortlessly, not to mention the humans and elves, both of which were Tier 3 classes. "Young man, was it you who saved us?" a middle-aged human male asked as he turned to Feng, his previous aura vanishing suddenly. This middle-aged man was a Tier 3 Great Mage. Even in White River City he would be considered an incredibly powerful individual. Players would find it difficult to gain an audience with such a character. "I'm not really sure. I merely cleared out the quartz worms residing here," Feng said truthfully, calming after seeing no evil intent among these NPCs. Hearing Feng mention the quartz worms, these level 150 NPCs examined their surroundings, bewilderment appearing on their faces. It was obvious that they too were unsure of the situation. After these NPCs had a quiet chat among themselves, the Tier 3 Great Mage named Carrion Walker walked up to Feng. "Although we are not sure of what happened exactly, we're certain that your actions saved us. As a show of our gratitude, we've unanimously decided to gift you this item," Carrion Walker said. He then took out a purple gold lightning-shaped emblem and carefully handed it over to Feng. "This emblem is our Imperial Army's honorary emblem. We hope that you will accept it." Feng accepted the emblem. When he inspected the information he was shocked. Thunder Emperor's Emblem. This is the honorary emblem of the Thunder Beast Empire. This grants the wielder honorary citizenship within the Thunder Beast Empire. Wasn't the Thunder Beast Empire destroyed long ago? Feng knew quite a bit about God's domain's history. The Thunder Beast Empire had been one of the extremely powerful empires in God's domain. During its peak, its territory encompassed over a dozen kingdoms. On the continent of God's domain, not a single kingdom or empire dared to act against it. The ruler of the Thunder Beast Empire had been the Thunder Emperor Kaiser. However, according to God's domain's historical records, to pursue eternal life and become a god, Kaiser had broken many taboos. As a result, his actions had earned the anger of the gods as the imperial capital had suddenly disappeared. Following the capital's disappearance, the Thunder Beast Empire had split into multiple kingdoms. At this point, the Thunder Beast Empire had long since faded from existence. Naturally, this Thunder Emperor's emblem also held no meaning whatsoever. Young adventurer, although we have been freed, we have many companions still living under the curse. We hope that you can save them. If you succeed, we will present to you the Empire's greatest treasure, Carrion Walker said as he looked at Feng, his clear expectation reflecting in his eyes. Are you not coming with me? Feng could not help but ask. Carrion Walker shook his head and said, Our time in this world has long since run out. Although the curse has been lifted, our strength wanes. Moreover, as we approach that place we lose strength faster. At this point, only you can save our companions. All right then. I promise you. Where do I have to go to save your companions? When Feng heard about the Empire's treasure, he thought that it might be related to the weapon he hunted. The clue he had obtained had indicated that the weapon hid within the dragon's maw. As it had been an extremely powerful empire in the past, the Thunder Beast Empire must have amassed countless treasures. The weapon he looked for might very well occupy the Empire's treasury. Rather than searching for the weapon blindly, he might as well accept this quest. We are merely people who had escaped the Imperial capital. Our companions are still trapped in the capital. This is a map of the Imperial capital. Hopefully it will be of some help to you, Carrion Walker said. He then took out a map of the Imperial capital and passed it to Feng. System: Epic Quest Empires Past accepted. Quest content: Save the people inside the Imperial capital within 10 days. If the quest is not completed within the allotted time, you will be inflicted with the petrification curse. Rewards unknown. An epic quest with a time limit of 10 days? Feng was immediately stunned upon hearing the system notification. He had never imagined that the quest would be so difficult. However, after giving it some thought, he found it reasonable. The weapon he sought was no trivial item. How could the game offer it up so easily? After Feng accepted the map, he summoned another Tier 3 demon. With 2 Tier 3 demons leading the way, it would be much easier to deal with the quartz worms. Now that Feng had a map, his progression into the Dragon's Maw's maze of the underground tunnels became a lot easier. After Feng reached the Dragon's Maw's second underground layer, many demonic beasts appeared in the dark tunnels. With a single glance, Feng counted over 500. The monsters squeezed tightly together as they blocked Feng's path. Giant Petrified Rat, Demonic Beast, Elite Rank. Level 60. HP 300, 000/300, 000. Without hesitation, Feng directed the 2 Tier 3 demons to clear out these rats. When the giant rats saw the 2 Tier 3 demons, they released ear-piercing screeches. One pounced on the Tier 3 demons. They showed no fear of the 2 Tier 3 demons. Normally, even monsters would fear a powerful enemy, yet these giant rats were unafraid. Feng used one Tier 3 demon to attract these giant petrified rats' attention while the other demon cast a Tier 3 spell. The petrified rats had very high attack power. Even against a Tier 3 demon, their bites dealt over -1000 damage. If these elites faced an MT player of the same tier, they could easily devour half of said player's HP. Meanwhile, these giant petrified rats attacked in groups of a dozen or so. They would instantly devour players of the same level. Only a Tier 3 demon with 9 million HP could withstand their assault for long. This is... Feng suddenly noticed that the Tier 3 demon that held off the rats began to show signs of petrification. A portion of its body had already begun to turn a dull gray. Could this be why even Tier 4 players have fallen here? Feng did not believe that these giant rats were capable of defeating a Tier 4 player with only their powerful bites. However, it was a different story if they could petrify their targets. Looking at the Tier 3 demon's statistics, although it had lost less than 1% of its HP, an additional petrification value had appeared. Currently, the demon displayed a petrification value of 0.84%, and with each bite from the giant rats, that value increased slightly. Needless to say, once this petrification value reached 100%, even if the Tier 3 demon still had 100% of its HP remaining, it would turn into stone. So this is how they work. Feng could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had only used his summoned demons to attack. If he had faced these monsters himself, the consequences would have been dire. The Tier 3 demons he summoned could last 5 hours. With the increment rate of the petrification value, although they would not last a full 5 hours against these monsters, they should have no problems fighting for 3 or 4 hours. Fortunately, he could summon a new demon once every 3 hours. In other words, he could rely on his summoned demons to fight for him, having no need to worry about being petrified or any hindrance to his progress. Chapter 7:16 Ruins of the Imperial Capital. Under Feng's control, the two level 52 Tier 3 demons quickly swept through all of the giant petrified rats in the stone hall. Following the clear sound of a system notification, a golden glow encompassed Feng. He had finally reached level 36. Without hesitation, Feng placed the 10 free attribute points he had just obtained into agility, partially making up for the loss of 25 agility he had previously suffered. The giant petrified rats were level 60 elites, and they dropped valuable loot. Aside from some materials, they dropped plenty of level 50 and above common and bronze equipment. In the outside world, Feng would have to grind far longer to obtain so many items. A Tier 2 skill book. Feng was slightly surprised as he picked up a book decorated with silver silk from the pile. In God's domain, the majority of a class's basic skills were learned from NPC instructors, while some of the slightly more powerful skills were obtained from quests. As for high-tiered skills, however, one could gain them by trading the legacy skill point that the system provided. Tier 0 skills could generally be found in the fields or dungeons. However, Tier 1 skills practically never dropped, increasing the difficulty of obtaining them exponentially. In truth, the majority of the Tier 1 skills that monsters dropped could be gained by trading in legacy skill points. If one obtained such a skill from monsters, they would not have to waste their legacy points to unlock said skill and could spend the points on learning other skills. Ordinary Tier 1 skills generally cost 2 legacy skill points to learn. Meanwhile, players only obtained 1 point for every 3 levels. Hence, a player would have to level up 6 times to learn an ordinary Tier 1 skill. If Tier 1 skills were already so expensive, there was no need to mention Tier 2 skills. Even the most common Tier 2 skill cost 4 legacy skill points. One had to level up 12 times to learn one. Hence, in God's domain, skill books were extremely valuable. Currently, the going rate for an ordinary Tier 1 skill book could even rival a piece of level 30 fine gold equipment. If it were a powerful Tier 1 skill such as a life-saving dash, AoE attack dash, control removal dash, or burst-type skill book, no one would sell it even for the price of a level 30 dark gold weapon, much less anything fine gold ranked. Weapons and equipment would be discarded as players increased in level. However, skills would not. Nobody would complain about too many skills. The drop rate of Tier 1 skill books in a large-scale Hell Mode team dungeon was roughly 2%. However, in large-scale Hell Mode team dungeons that were level 50 and above, the drop rate of Tier 2 skill books was less than 0.3%. Obtaining one was mostly due to luck. Hence, Feng was astonished when he realized that the giant petrified rats had dropped a Tier 2 skill book. Feng checked the skill book, discovering that it was the Tier 2 general melee skill, Dark Ghost. Dark Ghost, Tier 2 skill. Split yourself into 4 and attack simultaneously. Every doppelganger deals 100% of the main body's damage. Duration of 4 seconds. Cooldown, 2 minutes. Tier requirement, Tier 2 class or above. I recall someone exchanging this Dark Ghost skill for an epic item with relatively good attributes in the past. I never thought I would find it here. Feng was speechless. General skill books were much more valuable than class skill books as they could be used in a variety of battles. It was especially true for this Dark Ghost skill. If he suddenly split himself into 4 identical copies, who would dare to approach him casually? Hence, among Tier 2 general skills, Dark Ghost ranked relatively near the top. Many melee players had sought after this skill. If used during a crucial moment, the skill could turn the tide of battle. It's a pity that I can't learn it yet. I'll have to wait until I reach Tier 2. Feng tucked the Dark Ghost skill book away in satisfaction. He then directed the Tier 3 demons to advance. The second underground floor was like a massive maze. Even with the map in hand, Feng had a very difficult time progressing through it. Throughout his journey, he would occasionally encounter giant petrified rats' nests. When he met such encounters, he had no choice but to stop and clear out the nest. Otherwise he could not venture further. Moreover, due to the petrification issue, it became far more difficult to control the Tier 3 demon that held off the giant rats. In the end, Feng gave up on the Tier 3 demon altogether and let the giant rats attack it. With the Tier 3 demon's HP and Feng's life bloom, the giant petrified rates would never kill it. Although killing the rats was time-consuming, the fact that these elites could drop Tier 2 skill books motivated Feng. Moreover, he could also obtain a large sum of EXP. While Feng explored the Dragon's Maw's second underground floor, he instructed the Dark God's Legion, which had been training all this time, take action, delving deeper into the Stoneclaw Mountains. As an Azura mode regional dungeon, the Stoneclaw Mountains was somewhat special. Not only were the monsters inside the dungeon more powerful, but the loot was also better than elsewhere. The monsters also dropped magic crystals. More importantly, the monsters dropped barrier crystal balls. If one collected a sufficient number of barrier crystal balls, they could use them to form a barrier. The barrier would suppress the strength of contained enemies. It was just like the demon suppressing barrier that Blue Frost's team had used when they faced the level 40 Great Lord Noya. The barrier had greatly reduced Noya's combat power, making it a lot easier to raid the Great Lord. The barrier crystal balls were similar in this aspect. Only the barrier crystal balls were somewhat different from magic scrolls. Generally, magic scrolls were one-use items. Barrier crystal balls, however, could be used multiple times. Only each use would expend a lot of magic crystals. During God's Domain's initial stages, players were both low-leveled and low-tiered. Hence, most felt helpless against even high Lord-ranked monsters, not to mention Great Lords. Raiding these monsters simply required too much from players at this stage of the game. Perhaps the main god system had taken this into consideration. Since a player's strength was limited, the only other way to defeat these Grand Lord-ranked bosses was to suppress their strength. However, aside from quests, there were practically no methods or tools that could suppress boss-level monsters. Bosses of large-scale team dungeons had been a roadblock for many large guilds. However, after the Stoneclaw Mountains had appeared, the various guilds had discovered the barrier crystal ball in the dungeon's inner region. This had allowed the guilds to reduce the difficulty of large-scale team dungeons, significantly increasing their raiding speed. A guild only had a limited number of experts. Normally, only these experts were barely able to clear large-scale team dungeons. Large-scale team dungeons also had cooldown times. Hence, this had resulted in the rarity of top-tier equipment. However, if a guild could lower the difficulty of a large-scale team dungeon and allow players that were not quite experts to clear it, the acquisition of top-tier equipment would naturally skyrocket. Feng was not confident in dealing with the Flower of Seven Sins adequately. Against the Star Alliance, however, he had plenty of confidence. The best method to crush the Star Alliance swiftly was to increase Zero Wing's overall strength. After all, a battle between guilds could not be settled by an individual. Currently, the various large guilds were grinding in the Stoneclaw Mountains outer area. They avoided the inner region as they had deemed the danger to be higher than the potential rewards. The Flower of Seven Sins was already preparing to deal with Zero Wing. However, it would not be wise for Feng to send the main force into the Stoneclaw Mountains. But it was a different story for the Dark God's Legion. Originally, the Dark God's Legion's members were already powerful as individuals. After taking into account the power of darkness, they could easily venture into the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region to obtain the barrier crystal balls. Under Feng's command, the Dark God's Legion had no trouble obtaining several dozen barrier crystal balls. This was enough to outfit several 100-man teams to raid the hard-mode Frost Prison. Time passed quickly. After a day of travel through the second floor, Feng finally arrived at the staircase leading to the floor below. Meanwhile, Feng was already level 37. He had fully recovered the 25 agility he had lost. The instant Feng's foot landed on the staircase, the view before him changed. He was transported to a fog-covered city. The sound of a system notification suddenly reached his ears. System, you have discovered the ruins of the Imperial capital. Grinding mastery points. Chapter 717, Taboo City. The mana density here is intense. Standing in the mist, Feng suddenly felt his mind become clear and ethereal. He could see the mist's true colors. In God's domain, when players found themselves in places with high mana density, their minds would clear, and they would feel more energetic. This greatly aided in the improvement of their skill completion rates and combat techniques. With such a high mana density, the boost one could get in this area is no less than the 100-berry wine. If players fight and level up here, they could see improvements at least 5 or 6 times faster. It's a pity that this area isn't easy to access. When Feng opened his system interface, he discovered that he could not contact with the outside world at all. He had also discovered undead roaming down the lifeless city streets. Fortunately, they were not very high leveled. Suffering Soul, Undead Elite Rank. Level 60. HP 450, 000/450, 000. Ghoul, Undead, Special Elite. Level 60. HP 700, 000/700, 000. These half-transparent suffering souls and ghouls wandering about the city were not particularly numerous. A level 60 party should be able to handle these monsters very easily. Whether it was leveling up or improving one's skill completion rate, grinding monsters here would be beneficial. After examining his surroundings briefly, Feng took out an isolation scroll and used it. He then descended from the rooftop carefully and headed towards the palace indicated on the map. The city had long since died. Feng could see various statues haunting the city streets. These statues had all been citizens who had received the curse. However, it was unlikely that killing those undead would lift the curse. Feng would have to deal with the problem at its source. Based on Feng's understanding of the Thunder Beast Empire, only one person was capable of cursing an entire city. Thunder Emperor Kaiser. Emperor Kaiser had been a Tier 5 sword saint. He had only been a step away from becoming a Tier 6 god. Unfortunately, it had been so close, yet so far. To players, the promotion from a Tier 5 class to Tier 6 required great opportunities, luck, and strength. It was even more so for an NPC. For example, in the past, even the Dark Gold Guard Kite, with his vast potential, could only be promoted to Tier 5. It was practically impossible for him to reach the realm of Tier 6. According to the legend, in order to pursue eternal life, Emperor Kaiser had mobilized his empire to carry out a taboo. Looking at it now, it was highly possible that said taboo was related to the curse currently plaguing the Imperial capital. Damn it. The city is already in ruins, so why are there still guards? Feng stood on the roof of a building one street away from the palace, his eyes locked onto the mechanical guards stationed on either side of the palace gate. Thunder Beast Guard, Grand Lord. Level 200. HP? The Thunder Beast Guard's levels were just too high, so Feng could not see how much HP they had. However, he could confirm one thing: their HP was mind-bogglingly high. Normally, Grand Lords had 6 HP bars displayed. The Thunder Beasts had 10. Furthermore, there were a total of 8 Thunder Beast Guards. The Thunder Beast Empire's strength left Feng in awe. Feng had visited plenty of empires before. However, this was his first time seeing such powerful mechanical guards. The palace was also protected by a magic array. In order to enter the palace, Feng would either have to destroy the magic array or enter through the front gate. The first option of destroying the magic array was obviously unrealistic. Even a Tier 6 god would find it difficult to destroy a magic array that carried such dense mana, not to mention a Tier 1 swordsman like Feng. Yet, entering through the main gate was also unrealistic. Even a level 200 Tier 4 class would not dare to provoke 8 level 200 Grand Lords simultaneously. Feng was only a level 37 Tier 1 swordsman. The Thunder Beast Guards would send him to oblivion long before he ever reached the palace gates. Feng had thought of using a Tier 3 demon as bait. However, due to the gap in levels, rather than luring the guards away, he might draw the guards aggro himself. Do I have to give up just like this? Feng was frustrated. He observed his surroundings in hopes of finding a solution. After watching from the rooftop for some time, Feng suddenly discovered something interesting. There were plenty of undead roaming the streets in front of the palace. However, not a single suffering soul came within 200 yards of the palace gates. Only a few ghouls would wander near. Meanwhile, when a few occasional ghouls and suffering soul tried to wander towards the gates, the Thunder Beast guards vanquished them immediately. Only those few ghouls remained unharmed. The Thunder Beast guards should be absolutely neutral. They should regard both players and monsters as enemies. So why are those few ghouls safe? Feng was very curious. He even summoned a Tier 3 demon, directing it to capture a few ghouls from elsewhere and throwing the monsters towards the main gate. Without exception, the Thunder Beast guards annihilated every ghoul. This is interesting. Feng could not help his smile as he watched the few ghouls wander about before the gates. He then directed the Tier 3 demon to hide and waited for those few ghouls to wander out of the restricted area. Minutes and seconds passed quickly. However, Feng did not rush. To Feng, who had taken on many adventures and quests in God's domain, patience was the foundation of success. After more than an hour, a ghoul finally exited the 200-yard restricted area. Like an eagle hunting its prey, Feng directed the Tier 3 demon to nab the ghoul. No matter how hard the ghoul attacked and struggled, it could not break free from the demon's grasp. With a flap of its black wings, the demon put more distance between itself and the restricted area. The Tier 3 demon then brought the ghoul before Feng. Its hand gripped the ghoul tightly, preventing the special elite from moving. Meanwhile, Feng activated omniscient eyes to inspect just what differentiated this ghoul from the others. The ghoul was actually able to deter even the Thunder Beast guards from attacking it. The ghoul had mutated from a human's corpse. It still wore the noble's clothes it had worn in life. There had been nobles among the ghouls the guards had killed. Could it be that this ghoul had possessed a higher rank while it was alive? After observing the ghoul for some time, Feng failed to discover any clues. However, he did not believe that the main god system would have him complete this high-level quest for no good reason. For a quest in a level 60 map, even a legendary quest, level 60 players should be able to complete it. However, even level 200 players would not be able to get past the Thunder Beast guards before him, much less level 60 players. At the very minimum, it would take a team of 10 level 200 tier 4 players to defeat them. Forget it. Let's kill it as an experiment. In any case, there are a few more ghouls I can experiment with. In the end, failing to discover any peculiarities, Feng had the Tier 3 demon finish off this ghoul. When the ghoul died, it transformed into a bundle of meat and green liquid. It also dropped a few silver coins and some other items. Its loot was no different from the ghouls Feng had killed before. This is... Chapter 7:18 Grinding Mastery Points. Among the ghoul's loot, Feng found an item that he was relatively familiar with. Mastery Book. This item was extremely rare and would provide players with free mastery points. Normally, it could only be obtained from treasure chests or quests. This was the first time Feng had seen this item drop from a special elite. Feng's one-handed sword mastery had already become a basic sword master, the mastery increasing his damage with the one-handed sword by 30%. At this stage of the game, even for powerful experts, being an advanced swordsman was impressive, receiving a 20% damage increase. The majority of the expert players in God's domain were currently stuck as intermediate swordsmen. A bronze mastery book, huh? Feng was somewhat disappointed after he checked the mastery book's information. If it were a mysterious iron mastery book, he might be able to become an intermediate sword master this instant. When used, a bronze mastery book could provide players with anywhere from 5 to 25 free mastery points, significantly fewer than a mysterious iron mastery book's 10 to 50 points. Basic sword master required 150 mastery points. Intermediate sword master required 200 mastery points. If he were lucky with a mysterious iron mastery book, after including his previously accumulated free mastery points, he might have achieved the promotion to the intermediate sword master right away. At intermediate sword master, the mastery would increase Feng's damage with the one-handed sword by 40%. This was a significant increase to any player, not to mention Feng. Feng then used the bronze mastery book, obtaining 9 free mastery points. Adding this to what he had already accumulated, he had 177 mastery points. He was only 23 points away from the 200-point threshold. I wonder if all the remaining ghouls will drop mastery books as well? Feng could not help but get his hopes up. He then directed a Tier 3 demon to wait outside the restricted area while controlling the other Tier 3 demon to kill nearby ghouls. There were currently 3 more ghouls within 200 yards of the palace. However, Feng did not dare to lure them away casually. He was too low-leveled. A single mistake might attract the Thunder Beast Guard's attention. At that time he would certainly die. Hence he could not take this risk. As Feng bided his time quietly, steadily decreasing the ghoul population. He had obtained 1 bronze mastery book for roughly every 50 ghouls he killed. This gave Feng a good idea to strengthen himself and his guild. At the moment, God's Domains players did not focus overmuch on improving their weapon masteries. However, once players reached an adequately high level, they would discover the massive strength boost that mastery provided. As an intermediate sword master, Feng's damage with the one-handed sword would increase by 40%. As an advanced sword master, that bonus damage would increase to 50%. If Feng could go one step further and upgrade his mastery to Basic Sword King, his bonus damage with the one-handed sword would rise to 80%. 2 or 3 additional pieces of equipment could not bridge a 30% damage gap. Hence, among the many PvP battles that occurred in God's Domain, despite both sides being nearly equal in terms of techniques, the player with superior attributes would occasionally taste defeat. This was a result of the difference in mastery levels. If he could improve the mastery levels of the guild's upper echelons, they would have an easier time coping with the assassins of the Flower of 7 Sins. However, it would be very difficult to increase one's mastery to the Sword King standard. In order to reach the Advanced Sword Master standard, one required a total of 300 mastery points. Meanwhile, Basic Sword King required 450 mastery points, which was 3 times that of a Basic Sword Master. As Feng grinded ghouls while waiting for the ghouls inside the restricted area to venture out, a huge commotion occurred in Starmoon City. The Secret Pavilion's guild residence had appeared in Stone Forest Town. This was the second foreign guild to establish a guild residence in the town after Ouroboros. It was common knowledge that Ouroboros had only received such treatment due to its alliance with Zero Wing. However, what about the Secret Pavilion? Were they allies too? When the various large guilds considered the possible alliance between Zero Wing and the Secret Pavilion, they began to reconsider how they treated Zero Wing. The Secret Pavilion was a massive existence in the virtual gaming world. Although it did not participate in the struggles between guilds, no one dared to underestimate the pavilion. Even super guilds tread lightly when around the pavilion. Now that the Secret Pavilion occupied Stone Forest Town, the guilds who initially aspired to obtain the town would have to reconsider their options. Previously, since a first-rate guild like the Star Alliance had taken the lead, the various guilds in Starmoon Kingdom had gained some confidence in facing off with Zero Wing. However, there was a massive difference between the Star Alliance and the Secret Pavilion. Contesting over Stone Forest Town with the Secret Pavilion would be suicide. Inside the Star Alliance's guild residence. Purple, have you investigated the matter regarding the Secret Pavilion? Just what kind of relationship does Zero Wing have with the pavilion? Galaxy Past, who occupied the guild leader's throne, asked as he turned to Purple Eye. Originally, Galaxy Past had been in a merry mood as he had recently accepted a high-level rare quest. Just as he prepared to complete it, however, he had received this very distressing news. Hence, to get to the bottom of this situation, he had called for an emergency guild meeting. Aside from being one of the Star Alliance's top fighters, Purple Eye was also one of the guild's information managers. Purple Eye also possessed some special connections of her own, which allowed her to obtain information that even the Star Alliance could not get its hands on. Hence, Galaxy Past asked Purple Eye directly. According to the investigation, the Secret Pavilion is not in an alliance with Zero Wing, Purple Eye said softly. However, the pavilion seems to have conducted an internal trade with Zero Wing. As to what the two guilds have exchanged, even my sources could not uncover that. A trade? Galaxy Past frowned. Black Flame really knows how to surprise people. The Secret Pavilion does not trade with others easily. Just in case, slow down our actions against Zero Wing. From now on, we should be more careful when dealing with Zero Wing. Let Open Source Corporation deal with them. Although the Star Alliance had the OSC's financing, that did not mean the guild would sacrifice itself for the corporation. In the Stoneclaw Mountains outer region. Snow, now that the Secret Pavilion has established a guild residence in Stone Forest Town, Galaxy Past must be pretty annoyed. Zhao Yueru could not help but smile when she read the report she had just received. It really makes you wonder just how Big Brother Black Flame managed it. He actually roped in the secret pavilion. As long as the pavilion intervenes, the Star Alliance will be powerless in the Stoneclaw Mountains. It is still too early to determine anything. No one knows exactly what the secret pavilion exchanged with Zero Wing. If the secret pavilion is really willing to help Zero Wing, it would have already declared Zero Wing to be its ally rather than let the situation remain uncertain. However, my guess is that the Star Alliance will not act drastically anytime soon due to its fear of the pavilion. We can use this opportunity to snatch some of the high-resource areas the Alliance currently occupies. Gentle Snow expressed her intentions after examining the report. Due to the Open Source Corporation's financing, the Star Alliance had grown significantly stronger over these past few days. They had both gained new members and improved the quality of their members' equipment. It was especially true for the consumables the guild supplied to its members. Ouroboros stood no chance against the Star Alliance. This situation allowed the Star Alliance to occupy many of the high-resource areas in the Stoneclaw Mountains outer region. This was the perfect opportunity for them to steal those high-resource areas. A group of black-cloaked players had gathered inside a bar in Stone Forest Town. These players were all very high-leveled, with the lowest among them being level 34. On Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list, they could all rank among the top 10. With their presence alone, these people had caused a chill to sweep through the bar, causing the other players around them to shiver in fear. These players shared a commonality: they all were independent players. None of them belonged to any guild. Suddenly, a young man in silver robes entered the bar, instantly breaking the silence. The group of cloaked players stood at attention at this man's arrival, watching him seriously. None of them dared to show any disrespect. Everyone get ready. Open Source Corporation is already getting antsy. Chapter 719, Mastery Skyrockets. Ruins of the Imperial Capital. On the streets filled with wandering undead, Feng controlled the Tier 3 demon to slaughter ghouls. However, the presence of ghouls was quite rare, and after clearing several streets surrounding the palace, Feng had only obtained 4 bronze mastery books. His EXP bar, on the other hand, had risen significantly. Currently, he was at 53% of level 37. At most, he would need to grind for another day or so to reach level 38. Just after Feng killed the last ghoul within the 200-yard restricted area, golden light escaped from this ghoul's body and flew towards the sky. After the golden light dissipated, a golden beam shot into Feng's body. The sound of a system notification suddenly rang by Feng's ears. System, you have liberated a bound soul and have received the blessing of the dead. For each ghoul you kill, you will increase your Thunder Beast Empire reputation by 1 point. Killing ghouls increases my reputation with the Empire? Feng suddenly understood how he could enter the palace. One could not casually approach a kingdom's or empire's palace. One first needed a certain amount of reputation. Unfortunately, neither a kingdom's nor an empire's reputation was easy to obtain. Generally, one had to complete special quests or obtain the first clear of team dungeons to gain reputation for a kingdom or empire. These Thunder Beast guards were mechanical puppets. They would only carry out the commands they had been given. Hence, if Feng had sufficient reputation with the empire, he could walk into the palace unhindered. Meanwhile, if one wanted to enter a kingdom's palace, they needed to become a count first. As for an empire's palace, one had to become a Marquis. Becoming a Marquis required 5,000 reputation points. Normally, it would be exceedingly difficult to accumulate so much reputation. Now, however, Feng only needed to kill ghouls. With this, it would be much easier to rise to the rank of Marquis. No wonder this quest has a time limit of 10 days. It turns out that I need to kill 5,000 ghouls. Feng began to understand the quest's time limit. Ghouls were level 60 special elites. Moreover, there were also many suffering souls getting in the way. Feng would have no choice but to kill the elite monsters while hunting for ghouls. Even a level 60 ordinary expert would have to spend quite a long time killing a level 60 special elite ghoul. Each one could take anywhere from 7 to over a dozen minutes depending on the expert's strength. At that pace, even with 10 days, they would not be able to kill 5,000 ghouls. To Feng, though, this was not a problem. One level 52 Tier 3 demon took less time to kill a ghoul than a 20-man team. Fortunately, Feng could control 2 Tier 3 demons simultaneously. following which Feng began sweeping through the city for ghouls. Previously, as he had to wait for the ghouls in the restricted area to wander out, Feng's range of activity had been limited. Hence, his grinding efficiency had been very low. Now that this restriction was gone, he could move from one end of a street to the other, slaughtering everything without pause. As one ghoul after another fell, Feng's reputation rose. System, you have killed a ghoul. Reputation in Thunder Beast Empire +1. System, you have killed a ghoul. Reputation in Thunder Beast Empire +1. System, you have killed a ghoul. Reputation in Thunder Beast Empire +1. After 3 hours, Feng's reputation had increased to 207 points. He gained reputation far slower than he had expected. Although he killed the special elites very quickly, there were only so many ghouls that appeared on a single street. He had to waste a lot of time moving from one ghoul to another, which significantly reduced his efficiency. At this rate, I will only complete this part of the quest if I grind non-stop for 2 days. The remaining time should be enough to lift the curse on the city and complete the quest. Just as Feng was lost in thought, he heard a warning from the system. This warning was a notification telling him that someone was calling from the real world. Normally, the game would only warn players when communication with the outside world had been severed, and players were unable to accept real-world calls from inside God's domain. Did something happen? Feng didn't think too much about it as he immediately swiped his fingers, calling up the system interface and clicking the logout button. Previously, he had told Fire Dance and the others that he was working on a quest in a special area and that contact with the outside world was unavailable. Hence, they would not call him unless it was urgent. It was 3 a.m. in the real world. Normal people would not call at this time of night. For Blackie and the others to contact him in the dead of night, the only possibility was that something had happened to Zero Wing. Darkness surrounded Feng as he stepped out of his virtual gaming cabin. The ringing from the quantum watch Feng wore on his wrist echoed throughout the silent bedroom. Taking a look at the watch's display, Feng discovered that it was Blackie. Blackie, what's so urgent? Has something happened in God's domain? Feng asked after answering the call. Brother Feng, the Stoneclaw Mountains, something has happened. Blackie said in a panic after the call connected. Of the 300 members in the Dark Gods Legion, nearly all of them have been wiped out. Only a dozen or so managed to return to Stone Forest Town. Impossible. Feng was dumbfounded. Could it be the Star Alliance? That shouldn't be possible. Although the Dark Gods Legion only had 300 members, their equipment was first class. Their combat techniques were also top-notch. Furthermore, the Dark Gods Legion had a berserk skill like the power of darkness. Even if the Star Alliance sent out its best fighters, they could never annihilate the Legion. Initially, I wondered the same thing. However, based on what the survivors told us, the people who attacked them did not seem like members of the Star Alliance. They weren't red names either. They were a group of independent players. The instant they appeared, they killed off a few dozen members of the Legion. Even after everyone activated the power of darkness, they couldn't hold their ground against those independent players. Some of the more powerful players even killed Legion members in just a few moves. Before they could even react, they were dead. The news had also shocked Blackie. Hence, he had contacted Feng immediately. Aside from Zero Wing's main force, the Dark Gods Legion was the most powerful team in Zero Wing. Even throughout Starmoon Kingdom, the Legion ranked at the very top in terms of combat power. The Legion also had the power of darkness. Yet they had been massacred. News of this incident had already spread throughout Starmoon Kingdom. If they did not deal with this matter properly, Zero Wing's reputation would plunge to the darkest pits of the abyss. A group of independent experts with top-tier equipment and skills? Could it be the Flower of Seven Sins? Of all of Feng's possible enemies, only the Flower of Seven Sins was capable of such a feat. However, wasn't the organization's target Zero Wing's main force and upper echelon? Hearing Feng suggest that it was the Flower of Seven Sins doing, Blackie was momentarily stunned. Blackie agreed with Feng's deduction. Only, he never imagined that the Flower of Seven Sins would be so powerful. Initially, he had doubted that any power could easily defeat Zero Wing's Dark Gods Legion. Even if the Flower of Seven Sins took action, the organization would have to expend a lot of effort to take the Legion down. In the end, however, he had been sorely mistaken. If the Dark Gods Legion had already suffered such a fate, Zero Wing's main force was in trouble. Brother Feng, what should we do? Blackie asked, panicking. Chapter 720 Marquis. Feng fell silent at Blackie's question. He had never expected the Flower of Seven Sins to take action so quickly. Not only had the organization made its move several days earlier than estimated, but their targets had also not been Zero Wing's main force or upper echelons. The loss of EXP from the Dark God's Legion's annihilation was a small matter. However, it would not be easy to recover the lost equipment. Blackie, tell Aqua and the others that they are already being targeted immediately and try to stay within city limits as much as possible. Have them focus on improving their techniques in the Divine Colosseum. We'll deal with the Flower of Seven Sins once I return, Feng said after giving it some thought. The best decision right now would be to have Aqua Rose and the others avoid the Executioner's Blade. With so many refinement experts, Aqua Rose and the others would have no chance of victory in their current state. Right, also have Melancholic gather some materials for me. I'll need them once I return. In God's domain with players' current strength, it was impossible to commit murder in the cities or Stone Forest Town and get away with it. Although the Flower of Seven Sins was powerful, they would throw away their lives and suffer in jail for a time if they killed another player within a city. The Flower of Seven Sins would most likely avoid such a raw deal. If they wanted to deal with the Flower of Seven Sins, their best option was to wait for his return and set up a trap for the organization's assassins. Only then would they have a chance of victory. Anything else would just add bodies to the growing mound of corpses. I understand. Blackie nodded solemnly. Although he was frustrated, this was all he could do right now. After the call ended, Feng busied himself, refilling the gaming cabin's nutrient solution. He needed to give it his all and complete this epic quest of his as soon as possible. Now that he was halfway through the quest, he could not turn back to seek for help. The penalty for failing an epic quest was no laughing matter. I'm taking too much time to kill the ghouls. I need to work faster. After Feng logged into the game, he opened the Imperial capital's map and searched for the location with the highest density of monsters. Although the area around the palace is crowded, it's not the most populated area. Generally, the trade area has the most NPCs. After deciding on a destination, Feng activated Wind Rider, leading his 2 Tier 3 demons as he charged towards the Thunder Beast Empire's commercial district. At the same time, something was happening in Starmoon Kingdom. The news about the near annihilation of Zero Wing's Dark God's Legion had already appeared on Starmoon Kingdom's forums, and many players chatted about this latest drama. Aren't there a ton of experts in Zero Wing's Dark God's Legion? How did they get wiped out? I heard they were done in by a group of independent players. I used to think that Zero Wing was very powerful. It seems that they only amount to this much. Indeed. Others keep saying how powerful Zero Wing is and how the guild has so many experts. In the end, a group of independent players slaughtered them. As expected, everything was just a bunch of rumors. As news about Zero Wing's defeat spread, the guild's reputation began to sink. As a result, many players who had intended to join Zero Wing began to hesitate. Meanwhile, in Stone Forest Town, many guilds had begun to move covertly when they heard this news. They were all preparing to deal with Zero Wing. Haha. Open Source Corporation is truly formidable. They managed to annihilate Zero Wing's Dark God's Legion so quickly. This should be a major blow to the guild. Galaxy Past could not help but laugh when he received the news. Purple, do you know who did it? The Flower of Seven Sins. Purple Eye said with a serious expression. As an expert who had been nurtured by a super guild, Purple Eye knew quite a bit about the terror of the Flower of Seven Sins. Although she was quite happy that the Flower of Seven Sins targeted Zero Wing, she could not help her fear upon seeing the organization's frightening power. On the off chance that a major power hired the organization to target the Star Alliance, they would not laugh. It's no wonder they wiped out the Dark God's Legion. It seems that OSC really went all out this time. Galaxy Past similarly shivered when he heard the name of the Flower of Seven Sins, his joy vanishing. Since the Flower of Seven Sins has begun to strike, we won't have anything to worry about. Notify Red Feather and the others. Both inside and outside of the Stoneclaw Mountains, tell them to kill every Zero Wing member they meet. Previously, the Star Alliance had been afraid of an ambush by Zero Wing's top fighters. Hence, the guild had dispatched mostly elite members to the Stoneclaw Mountains, with only a few experts to tag along. Now that they had the support of the Flower of Seven Sins, however, things had changed. In terms of top combatants, the Flower of Seven Sins possessed an overwhelming advantage. Now, rather than fear Zero Wing's experts, their experts could strike. That way, the Flower of Seven Sins could obliterate all of them in one go, burning Zero Wing's prestige to the ground. I'll get it done. Purple Eye left to put the plan into action. As the Star Alliance's experts began to move, Zero Wing, which had dominated the Stoneclaw Mountains, was suddenly at a disadvantage in the regional dungeon, its members having to take precautions. Vice Leader Aqua, many guild members have begun complaining about our inaction. If you keep having us train in the Divine Coliseum and ignore the situation in the Stoneclaw Mountains, I'm afraid that morale will start to fall. Vice Leader, why don't you let us deal with those bastards from the Star Alliance? The Dark God's Legion will put fear into their hearts, and the Alliance won't dare set foot in the Stoneclaw Mountains ever again. Many of Zero Wing's core members were annoyed with the Star Alliance's actions, eager to participate in the battles in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Rejected. I understand your sentiments and I feel the same, but we will only fall into the Star Alliance's trap by doing so. Guild leader has already ordered us to put everything aside until his return, Aqua Rose said, shaking her head. As for the Stoneclaw Mountains, everyone should just go elsewhere to level up for now. Previously, roughly a dozen of the guild members had attacked without authorization in the hopes of teaching the Star Alliance a lesson. In the end, they died before they had even arrived at the transfer gate to the Stoneclaw Mountains. The dozen or so main force members had been defenseless. Moreover, the enemy even had fighters at the time. Launching a counterattack right now would be the equivalent of gifting their equipment to their enemies. For now, they could only give up on the resources in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Meanwhile, inside the ruins of the Imperial capital. After luring and killing monsters in the trade area for more than a day, Feng finally managed to kill 5,000 ghouls, reaching level 38 and becoming a Marquis of the Thunder Beast Empire. However, Feng was more excited about the mastery books he had obtained. Although the drop rate in the trade area was much lower, the 5,000 ghouls Feng killed had yielded him a total of 31 bronze mastery books. After killing 5,000 ghouls, Feng had killed practically every ghoul in the trade area. The ghouls in the Imperial capital were different from the monsters in the outside world. They did not respawn after they died, so there would be one ghoul less with each kill. Hence, no one else would ever grind here for mastery books again. With so many mastery books, I wonder just how many mastery points I'll obtain? Hopefully my luck won't be too bad. Feng then took out a mastery book from his bag and clicked to use it. Chapter 721, Promotion to Sword King. After Feng clicked Use, the mastery book transformed into a silver light and vanished. A half-transparent prize wheel then appeared before him. A bronze mastery book offered a player anywhere from 5 to 25 free mastery points. A player's luck attribute had no effect whatsoever on this type of prize wheel. The needle of the prize wheel would only stop spinning when the player shouted, "Stop." However, the prize wheel was not divided into equal sections. The higher the number of free mastery points a section provided, the smaller its area was on the wheel. For example, the 5-point section occupied 25% of the wheel. It was easy to land on. Meanwhile, the 25-point section occupied less than 1% of the wheel. As for relying on one's eyesight for a better outcome, it was simply impossible. The naked eye could not keep up with the spinning needle. There was no way to determine when one should stop the needle. After Feng yelled, "Stop," the needle slowed. The needle stopped at the 6-point section. Sure enough, it won't be easy to land on a high-point section. Fortunately, I have 35 mastery books with me. I should gain enough points to become an advanced sword master. Feng could not help but laugh bitterly as he looked at the number he had obtained. He needed 200 mastery points to reach the intermediate sword master standard, and 300 points to reach the advanced sword master standard. Currently, he had 177 mastery points. With the addition of the 6 points he had just obtained, he would have 183 points in total. Even if he got 5 points from every bronze mastery book, he would gain at least 170 mastery points. He wouldn't have any issues gaining the promotion to an advanced sword master. His damage with the one-handed sword would increase by 50%. His strength would also rise significantly. Following which, Feng began plowing through the mastery books. Mastery plus 5. Mastery plus 7. Mastery plus 5. Mastery plus 9. Not a single roll he made exceeded 10 points. The bronze mastery books the ghouls had dropped were extraordinarily fraudulent. However, after using 14 bronze mastery books, Feng managed to increase his one-handed sword mastery to 300 points. I still have 20 books left, and I'm just 150 points away from 450 mastery points. Let's try for Sword King. Feng had intended to leave a few mastery books for Fire Dance and the others. However, if he could upgrade his one-handed sword mastery to basic Sword King, the lethality of his attacks would be no laughing matter. If he went up against a top-tier MT, he would need roughly 7 basic attacks as an advanced sword master to end the battle. If he became a basic Sword King, he would only need 5 hits. This was not including skills. In other words, if he upgraded his one-handed sword mastery to the basic Sword King standard, it would be the equivalent of permanently activating a minor berserk skill with an indefinite duration. In PvP battles, this improvement could allow him to challenge opponents of a higher tier. Currently, Feng was only at the flowing water realm. The equipment of top-tier experts in God's domain continuously improved. On the other hand, his equipment had long since reached the peak. It would be extremely difficult to improve his equipment for a while. Hence, his advantage of attributes decreased as time went on. In a battle of basic attacks, Feng estimated himself to be only slightly stronger than a Void Realm expert wearing top-tier equipment and at his level. If he wanted to kill a Void Realm expert, it would take him a relatively long time. Against so many experts from the Flower of Seven Sins in a group battle, the longer the Void Realm expert pinned him down, the greater the danger he would be in. However, if he could become a basic Sword King, killing a Void Realm expert would become much easier. Hence, it was imperative for Feng to become a basic Sword King. Feng then continued using the bronze mastery books. 1 book, 2 books, 3 books. 1 bronze mastery book after another vanished from Feng's hands. Mastery plus 6. Mastery plus 8. Mastery plus 5. Mastery plus 9. 8 more points. Feng looked at the indicator displayed beside his one-handed sword mastery. Picking up the last mastery book, he clicked Use. As the needle began spinning, Feng inhaled deeply before shouting, "Stop!" If he could not obtain 8 points, then he needed to go elsewhere to search for more ghouls. The trade area housed the highest ghoul population. Other places had fewer ghouls. If he wished to obtain another mastery book, he would have to kill at least 100 ghouls. He would have to waste another 2 or 3 hours. Immediately, the needle began to slow, passing through the double-digit sections and the 5-point section. The needle continued through the 6-point section. In the end, the needle gradually came to a halt at the 9-point section. System: you have obtained 9 free mastery points. Without hesitation, Feng placed all 9 points into his one-handed sword mastery, boosting the mastery to 451 points. System: congratulations. Your one-handed sword mastery has reached 451 points. For becoming the first player to upgrade your one-handed sword mastery to the basic Sword King, you will be rewarded with the title of Swordsmanship Master. Feng examined the Swordsmanship Master title. Swordsmanship Master. When using sword-type weapons, attack speed increased by 20%. When attacked by sword-type weapons, evasion plus 20. You may only use one title at a time. Effects will not stack with other titles. Increase attack speed by 20%. Such a powerful title. Feng was shocked. In God's domain, very few weapons and equipment increased a player's attack speed. Every item that did was precious. This was the first time Feng had seen a title capable of increasing a player's attack speed by 20%. In the past, the highest amount he had heard of was 15%. I had been unsure about going up against that Void Realm expert from the Flower of Seven Sins. Now that I have my one-handed sword mastery at the basic Sword King level and the Swordsmanship Master title, I should be able to end the battle quickly. Feng could not suppress his grin as he looked at the Swordsmanship Master title. Feng wished he could return to White River City immediately. However, he was only halfway done with his quest. It's about time I pay the palace a visit. Feng immediately switched his title to Thunder Beast Marquis. He then activated Wind Rider and flew towards the palace. With his rank as a Marquis, none of the Thunder Beast guards on either side of the palace's main gate moved to stop Feng. The Grand Lord simply allowed Feng to enter the palace. However, the guards instantly killed the Tier 3 demon Feng had summoned. It frustrated Feng slightly. As soon as he passed through the palace gates, Feng was greeted by the sight of numerous mechanical guards patrolling the spacious hall. Thunder Beast Patrol, Great Lord. Level 200. HP? Although these Thunder Beast patrols were not as strong as the Thunder Beast guards, they were far more of them. Each squad had 20 Thunder Beast patrols. Against such a force, even a level 200 tier 4 player would have to tuck tail and run. If I had really tried to barge my way in, this would have been my grave. As Feng watched the Thunder Beast patrols, he recalled the rumors of so many tier 4 players dying here. These Thunder Beast patrols merely glanced at Feng before continuing with their duties. Feng moved through the palace unhindered. Due to the Thunder Beast patrols, not a single monster was present in the palace. Feng easily reached the palace's heart, the Thunder Beast courtyard. The map indicated that the Thunder Beast courtyard was where Thunder Emperor Kaiser lived. Hence, Feng had made his way there. Such intense mana. The density here is almost triple that of the outside world. Before Feng even entered the Thunder Beast courtyard, he could feel his mind clearing. This was a phenomenon that would only occur when the mana reached a certain density. It seems that I was right to come here. Chapter 722, Demigod. A curse that could plague the Imperial capital would require an immense amount of mana to sustain. Hence, places with high mana density had a higher likelihood of holding the curse's source. Feng entered the Thunder Beast courtyard. At this point, the once splendid courtyard had become a dilapidated ruin. Meanwhile, a five-fold magic array enveloped something in the courtyard's center. Feng could faintly see a bottomless pit in the center of the courtyard. This pit released a continuous stream of mana. However, unlike the mana Feng usually saw, this felt violent and cold. Just looking at sent chills down his back. Feng could not imagine what would happen if someone stayed near this mana for too long. If not for the five-fold magic array before him suppressing the mana, Feng did not doubt for a second that this mana would surge and flood the Imperial capital in the blink of an eye. Could Emperor Kaiser have attempted to open the Endless Abyss? Feng suddenly recalled the Endless Abyss when he felt this cold, violent mana. The Endless Abyss had a vile environment, yet its mana density was astounding. With the combination of these two aspects, it birthed many horrifying monsters. There were some monsters that even gods feared. Hence, the gods had sealed the Endless Abyss. These frightening monsters wanted to claim God's domain as their own. Hence, the war between the human race and the Endless Abyss had never ceased. Rumors had it that Emperor Kaiser had reached the pinnacle of Tier 5 and was only a thread away from becoming a Tier 6 god. Feng could empathize with Emperor Kaiser. Although there was only a difference of one tier between Tier 5 and Tier 6, the power gap was like the difference between heaven and earth. One side was doomed to be devoured by the river of time, while the other was free of any bindings. To an emperor, nothing was more tempting than eternal life. Hence, there was nothing surprising about Emperor Kaiser trying to open a path to the Endless Abyss in search of a breakthrough. As Feng approached the bottomless abyss and was about to take a closer look at it, a chilling aura bound him, preventing him from moving. "Who are you? Why have you come here?" A cold voice dripping with power echoed from the bottomless pit. The voice was void of any emotion. "I am an adventurer. A great mage called Carrion Walker sent me here to lift the curse on the Imperial capital, saving the suffering people within the city," Feng said slowly and truthfully, showing no resistance towards the person questioning him. "Carrion Walker?" the voice said with a hint of surprise. "I never imagined that little fellow would escape the capital with his life. He really is impressive. If I had not been swayed by my own feelings and my wish to improve myself, such a terrible disaster would never have occurred. Could you be the Thunder Emperor Kaiser?" Feng could not help his shock when he heard the disembodied words. Thunder Emperor Kaiser. I wonder how many years it has been since I last heard that name? That's right, I am Kaiser. However, Kaiser sighed and said, "It is unfortunate, but you have wasted your time by coming here. It is impossible to lift the curse on the city. You are simply too weak right now and you cannot help me seal this abyss." "May I know how to seal it?" Feng probed, refusing to give up. If he gave up on the quest, only death awaited him. To seal this abyss, someone needs to suppress the mana temporarily. That way I can form a new magic array to close off the Endless Abyss. Although Feng knew that he was not nearly strong enough, he gritted his teeth and asked, "May I know how powerful I need to be to suppress this mana temporarily?" "You must be a demigod," Kaiser said straightforwardly. When Feng heard the word, demigod, he was confused. In God's domain, Tier 5 classes were considered saints, whereas Tier 6 classes were considered gods. What was a demigod? This was the first time Feng had heard this term in God's domain. It should be known that even if players at the very peak of Tier 5 or Tier 5 NPCs that could rival Tier 6 gods, nobody had ever been referred to as a demigod. You are too weak, so it is expected that you do not know about demigods. As if he understood Feng's doubts, Kaiser began explaining, the difficulty of crossing the threshold of Tier 5 and becoming a Tier 6 god is much greater than you imagine. Not only must you undergo a transition in your life orders, but you must also possess the immortal brilliance. A demigod has only reached Tier 6 in their life order but does not possess a brilliant will. Hence they are limited as demigods. Transition? Brilliant will? Is this the requirement to become a Tier 6 class? This was the first time Feng had heard details about becoming a Tier 6 classes. Although he had played God's domain for over a decade, he had never reached Tier 5. He had no authority to speak on Tier 6. Moreover, all information regarding Tier 6 classes were top secret. A second-rate guild had no access. However, once Feng understood what a demigod was, despair filled his heart. Not only must he be a Tier 5 class, but his life order must also be a Tier 6. There was no such player in God's domain right now. As for the NPCs, one could probably count them on one hand. He could not simply meet with one because he wanted to, not to mention getting their help. Are there no other methods? Feng asked anxiously. After a short pause, Kaiser replied, none. Unless you have the 7 treasures, you will need the strength of a demigod to suppress this mana. However, the 7 treasures have been lost for hundreds of years. Locating them would be far more difficult than finding a demigod. Feng knew of the 7 treasures. In fact, he had a quest to search for them. He even had the golden stigmata to assist him in locating the 7 treasures. However, he had yet to find even one of the 7 treasures. Either the strength of a demigod or a tool that can suppress the mana? Feng racked his mind for any relevant information. When considering NPCs that might be demigods, Feng could think of a few candidates. One of which was Faust, whom he had met in Star River Valley. Faust had once managed to seal a Tier 5 Great Demon King. He had also survived an exchange with a god. He was a mythical character who had lived for over 300 years. Another candidate would be the City Lord of Blackwing City. Even kingdoms and empires feared the City Lord. He was not an ordinary Tier 5 NPC. There was also Hell's Gatekeeper, Christie. That NPC guarded the most dangerous God Mode regional dungeon throughout God's domain. The final boss of the God Mode regional dungeon was a Tier 6 god. One could just imagine how powerful Christie was. The NPC was not a simple Tier 5 class either. However, none of these NPCs were easy to contact. Aside from these human NPCs, Feng had also encountered several monsters with the strength of a demigod. The Fallen Angel Serena. Fallen Angel's life order was very high. They were only inferior to gods. At Tier 5 they should be as powerful as a demigod. Right? How could I forget? Demons are on the same level as fallen angels. Feng suddenly remembered the Bible of Darkness. He possessed the original version of the summoning book. Even though it was only a fragment, it could still summon a Tier 5 Great Demon King. A Great Demon King was much stronger than a Tier 5 human. The only problem was that he wasn't strong enough to summon a Great Demon King. Maybe Kaiser could. Chapter 723, Power of the Bible of Darkness. The Bible of Darkness was a treasure created by the Lord of Destruction. It possessed the power to rule over all demons, allowing one to become the Lord of Demons. Since ancient times, abyssal demons were one of the top races in the Endless Abyss and were one of the human race's greatest enemies. Even Tier 6 demons wandered in the Endless Abyss, not to mention Tier 5 demons. Through the power of spacetime, the Bible of Darkness could summon a demon from the Endless Abyss. However, the Bible of Darkness had already been destroyed, so it could not exert its true power. Summoning a Tier 5 Great Demon King was its limit. Your Imperial Majesty, may I know if this will be of some help? Feng took out the thick, heavy Bible of Darkness. The dense power of darkness that radiated off the Bible was more than enough to instill fear. NPCs that were not quest-related could not steal items from players. Hence, Feng was not worried about Kaiser snatching the Bible of Darkness. Although NPCs could not steal a player's items, they could use them. However, Feng was not sure if Kaiser could use the Bible of Darkness as he was now. The Bible of Darkness? Kaiser recognized the thick book immediately, shock appearing on his face. I had never expected a little guy like you to have such a treasure. It's unfortunate that the Bible has been destroyed and cannot exert its true power. Otherwise, with this book's original strength, it could seal the passage to the Endless Abyss easily. Feng was stunned. The passage to the Endless Abyss could not be opened and closed as one wished. Otherwise, the War God Temple would not have tried so hard to search for the 7 treasures to suppress the passage between the 2 worlds. However, listening to Kaiser, the Bible of Darkness actually possessed the power to open and close the passage. In other words, the completed form of the Bible of Darkness was as powerful as the 7 treasures. Although the Bible of Darkness has been damaged, it could be of some help, Kaiser said. In the next moment, the Bible of Darkness flew out of Feng's hand and fell into the bottomless pit. Little guy, back away. At Kaiser's warning, Feng did not dare remain where he stood. Immediately, he turned and ran out of the Thunder Beast courtyard. The pressure exuded by a demigod-level existence was no laughing matter. Previously, Kaiser had used his aura to bind and render Feng immobile. If a demigod like Kaiser flicked his finger, Feng would likely turn to dust. After Feng fled the Thunder Beast courtyard, the mana density began to rise rapidly. In the next moment, a massive pair of gates made of bone appeared above the courtyard. Compared to the demon gates that appeared when Feng summoned Tier 3 demons, this demon gate was colossal. The demon gate loomed like a mountain, and the pressure it radiated warped the courtyard's atmosphere. This is the demon gate a demigod can summon? Feng finally realized how terrifyingly powerful the Bible of Darkness was after seeing the towering demon gate. It was no wonder why so many NPCs in God's domain were so keen to obtain it. The power he could currently exert with the Bible was just the tip of the iceberg. If the wielder could summon an army of demons during battle, who could stand against them? It was uncertain whether a Tier 5 player could even defeat a Tier 5 Great Demon King, not to mention a group of them. Moreover, said player would also have to face the summoner, who was also a Tier 5 class. This alone allowed the Bible's wielder to defeat Tier 5 classes. If the Bible were complete, even at Tier 5, one could challenge Tier 6 God-ranked players and Tier 6 gods. As the gates slowly opened, a one-horned demon that was over 30 meters tall emerged. The demon's body was pitch black, and it wielded a sword covered in emerald fire. Feng felt his breath catch in his throat as the demon's dark eyes swept over him. Feng tried to appraise this one-horned demon's statistics. However, all he found was unknown. Since the demon's information was hidden from normal observation, he would have to move closer to use omniscient eyes. Despicable human. You have the gall to summon me, the great demon King Andos? Prepare to die. Andrus bellowed, glaring at the bottomless pit. The fire devouring his massive sword suddenly blossomed into a raging inferno. One swing was all it would take to destroy the Thunder Beast courtyard. So powerful. This is definitely the most powerful Tier 5 monster I have ever seen. Feng was shocked as he watched the Great Demon King. Despite standing so far away from the Demon King, its aura left him unable to move. This strength was so close to that of a true god. Of course, it was also possible that Serena, the Tier 5 fallen angel he had encountered before, had not displayed her true strength. Just as the emerald fire was about to descend, countless blue chains suddenly shot out of the bottomless pit, binding Andrus and his emerald fire. Andrus, don't try to resist. I have the Bible of Darkness. Even if you are as strong as I am, under the power of the Bible, you cannot strike against me, the Thunder Emperor threatened the demon in a low growl. Andrus moaned painfully. You demons are born with a higher life order than humans. However, there are also constraints on your power. If you submit now, I can allow you to retain your will. Otherwise, I will turn you into a puppet. I submit. In the end, the great demon King Andrus agreed reluctantly. Demons originated from the Bible of Darkness. They were born without the ability to resist the Bible. Although the Bible had been damaged, it contained enough power to compel a great demon king. Currently, only Tier 6 demon gods had the power to resist the Bible's restrictions. Suppress the mana from the abyss for me, Kaiser ordered, not wasting any time with nonsense. Having no other choice, Andrus controlled his endless emerald fire to seal the bottomless pit. Suddenly, the mana from the abyss was contained. The Thunder Emperor Kaiser then flew out of the pit. Feng could finally see the true Thunder Emperor Kaiser. The Emperor wore a suit of golden armor with a set of white robes. Electric arcs were faintly visible as they surrounded Kaiser. 2 sacred swords hung from the Emperor's waist, one red and one blue. His smooth golden hair and young face left one speechless. Female players would consider this man to be a god of male beauty. Kaiser, Thunder Emperor, Human Sword Saint. Level? HP? / After Kaiser emerged from the pit, he unsheathed his 2 sacred swords. As the blades left their scabbards, the surrounding space froze. It was as if the connections between the space around the swords and the outside world had been severed. What are those weapons? They can freeze the world around them? Feng's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when he saw those sacred swords. Could one of them be one of the 5 fragments I am looking for? Just as Feng fantasized about the weapons, Kaiser used the twin swords to draw divine runes in the air before him. Divine runes of the highest quality formed, line after line. A short moment later, the Emperor had drawn over 100 lines of runes. The spell Kaiser was casting was far more complex than any Tier 5 spell Feng had seen before. Seal. God Banishing Domain. With a shout, Kaiser brandished his 2 swords. A golden, 6-fold magic array appeared above the palace. This magic array wrapped around the palace, sucking in the mana of the abyss like a hungry beast. This was the first time in his life Feng had seen anything so magnificent. Chapter 724, Sacred Sword Killing Ray. The God-banishing domain very quickly spread beyond the palace. As mist began to gather above the Thunder Beast courtyard, the foggy Imperial capital gradually clearing. After a dozen or so minutes, the mist covering the Thunder Beast Imperial capital had disappeared. As the fog faded, the power of the curse that plagued the Imperial capital began to weaken. The ghouls and suffering souls wandering about the streets had started to die. Meanwhile, the humans who had been petrified for hundreds of years now, recovered from their stone-like state. System: Epic Quest Empires Past completed. Quest reward: 50 million EXP. To ordinary players, 50 million EXP might be a lot, but to Feng, who needed double the EXP to level up, he needed several hundreds of millions of EXP to reach the next level. Hence, the effect 50 million EXP had was limited. I've finally finished this quest. Feng sighed in relief when he heard the system notification. All he had left was collecting his reward from Carrion Walker. Epic quests not only offered bountiful rewards, but they also had severe penalties for failing. Although Feng did not know how the petrification curse would affect him, in the event that he failed the epic quest, there was no escaping the loss of some levels and attributes. After Kaiser finished sealing the passage to the Endless Abyss, he sent the great demon King Andrus back as well. Meanwhile, Kaiser stood quietly alone beside the bottomless pit. Adventurer, here is your Bible of Darkness. In the blink of an eye, Kaiser appeared before Feng and passed the Bible of Darkness back to him carefully. Thank you for helping me. Without your help, the curse would still have its grip on the capital's citizens. I don't have much to give you as thanks, so here, I will give you this sword that I had used during my younger days. Saying so, Kaiser took out an immaculate long sword and handed it to Feng. Initially, Feng had dreamed of receiving one of the sacred swords that hung from Kaiser's waist. This was the first time Feng had ever seen a weapon that could freeze the space around it. However, the long sword the Thunder Emperor offered him was also extraordinary. The hilt was snow white, while the blade was an emerald green. Divine golden runes were etched on the emerald blade. Overall, the sword looked as if it were made of clear gemstone. One could also see blue arcs of electricity appear around the sword. When Feng placed his hand around the hilt, a cold sensation seeped into him from the sword. Suddenly he felt his mind clear. When he moved the sword, he could feel space flow away from the blade. With a gentle swing, the emerald long sword transformed into a streak of lightning, moving instantly from one side to the other. Isn't this sword a little too impressive? Feng stared at the emerald long sword in disbelief. He could feel a higher compatibility rate with this sword than what he had with the abyssal blade. His speed with the sword, however, was what shocked him the most. Even when he achieved maximum speed with the abyssal blade, the magic weapon was still significantly slower than this sword. It was as if this sword could enhance his speed. I happened to come across this sacred sword while exploring an ancient ruin. The sword's name is Killing Ray. I ask that you cherish it, Kaiser said. The Thunder Emperor could not help but reminisce about his youth when he looked at the emerald longsword. His Thunder Emperor title was largely due to this sacred sword, Killing Ray. When Feng heard of the sword's name, he immediately grew ecstatic. Killing Ray was one of the 36 famed swords in God's domain, and it was one of the fragments of Solomon's sword that he was searching for. Killing Ray was different from the Abyssal Blade. The Abyssal Blade was a magic weapon, but Killing Ray was not. No matter how often he used it, he would never have to fear a curse or backlash. Immediately, Feng called up the attribute panel for the sacred sword, Killing Ray. Killing Ray, one-handed sword, sacred sword, epic rank. Level 30, level 120. Equipment requirement, strength 700. Attributes adjust to user's level. Attack power plus 760, level 30. Strength plus 70, agility plus 64, endurance plus 55. Strength increased by 10%. Agility increased by 10%. Attack speed plus 20. Attack speed increased by 10%. Ignore 20% of the target's defense. All sword skills plus 2 levels. Ignore levels plus 20. All item level requirements reduced by 5 levels. Attacks have a 40% chance to trigger lightning, setting the initial attack speed as 50% of total attack speed and increasing damage by 240%. Additional skill 1 dash. Summon lightning. Summons lightning to deal 400% lightning damage to enemies within a range of 15 yards and inflict the numb effect for 5 seconds. Afterward, attack range increased by 20 yards for 30 seconds. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Additional skill 2 dash. Thunder God's Descent. Become immune to all control skills, movement speed and attack speed increased by 150%, damage increased by 50%, and all damage received decreased by 50% for 30 seconds. Cooldown 1 hour. This sacred sword had been forged by the godsmith Arnold using a fragment from a mysterious sword. Killing Ray is one of the 36 famed swords of God's domain, ranking 20th. It was once used by the Thunder Emperor Kaiser. This weapon allows the user to move with the speed of lightning. When fighting darkness-type creatures, damage increases by 100%. Can be evolved. Cannot be destroyed. Such powerful attributes. Feng was stunned speechless as he examined Killing Ray's attributes. No wonder it ranks 20th among the 36 famed swords. Sure enough, it is even stronger than the Abyssal Blade. Regarding attack power or basic attributes, Killing Ray was much stronger than the epic weapon Petrified Thorn he had previously obtained. However, the sacred sword's attributes were not its most amazing aspect, nor was it the fact that it could not be destroyed and thus, did not possess a durability limit or require repairs, nor the 100% damage increase towards darkness-type creatures. To players who love to PvP, its speed was the Killing Ray's most impressive feature. The passive skill Lightning allowed one's initial attack speed to start at 50% rather than 0. This meant that while attacking, players would not take as long to accelerate to a maximum speed. A player's sword draw would be much faster than normal. Following which, Feng immediately traded the Purgatory Shadow for Killing Ray. To Feng, the requirement of 700 strength was nothing considerable. He had fully inlaid Tier 3 strength-type gemstones into his equipment. His strength attribute had long since exceeded the 700-point threshold. Instantly, Feng's overall attributes increased by a sizable chunk. Feng was currently level 38. Hence, the level of Killing Ray adjusted to match his level. The level 30 Killing Ray had offered 760 attack power. Now that jumped to 1002. This allowed Feng's basic attack power to rise by several hundred points. Before equipping Killing Ray, with Feng's one-handed sword mastery at the basic Sword King standard, he would have needed 5 normal attacks to defeat an MT of the same level. Now he would only need 4 hits. If he triggered consecutive critical hits, he could end the battle in 2 hits. So much strength. Feng could not suppress his shock after wrapping his hand around Killing Ray's hilt. With this strength he was even more peerless. With the magic weapon, Abyssal Blade in one hand and the sacred sword Killing Ray in the other, Feng felt like he could even rival a strength-type chieftain of the same level. He also had a passive skill like lightning. Even against a Void Realm expert, unless said expert was also astonishingly fast, Feng was confident of ending the battle in just a few moves. Chapter 725, Intermediate Magic Array. After completing the epic quest and obtaining the sacred sword, killing Ray, Feng returned through the transfer passage to the Dragon's Maw's lowest underground floor. After leaving the special map, Feng used the activatable skill of the Aura of Space movement, to appear before Carrion Walker. Upon returning to Carrion Walker and the other NPCs, Feng noticed that these NPCs had grown significantly older. Although the petrification had allowed them to live for hundreds of years, once the curse lifted, time had begun to erode their bodies, causing them to age rapidly. At the end of the day, they were mortals, not gods. They could never break free from the shackles of time. If Feng had not hurried back so quickly, Carrion Walker and the others would have passed away. Young adventurer, thank you. I can already feel the curse in my body vanishing. With this, we can leave this world without regret. Carrion Walker looked at Feng and bowed deeply. He then took out a golden book and passed it on to Feng, saying, "This is our Thunder Beast Empire's prided magic array, the 9-star polar domain. Hopefully it will be of help to you someday." Feng accepted the immensely heavy magic array illustration, excitement appearing on his face. Magic array illustrations were extremely rare in God's domain. The various kingdoms and empires were extremely secretive about magic arrays, each conducting their own research in the field. Naturally, any results were kept secret. Normally, when ordinary people used magic arrays, they relied on magic scrolls. The same was true for players. Meanwhile, these magic scrolls that were created from magic array illustrations. There were various types of magic arrays such as enhancement, suppression, and binding. Regardless of the type of magic array, they were all exceedingly rare. Normally, players could only obtain magic array scrolls through quests or treasure chests. Although the Stoneclaw Mountains had introduced players to the barrier crystal balls, they were not very convenient. They took a long time to activate. Moreover, the barrier crystal balls were not nearly as strong as the magic scrolls. Their capabilities were also limited. They were unlike magic scrolls, which could be activated swiftly with little to no restriction. Hence, magic array illustrations were rare and precious. If players wanted to research their own magic arrays, they would require a massive amount of time, energy, and resources. It was already exceedingly difficult for an ordinary large guild to obtain a magic array illustration, not to mention researching one from scratch. Now that he had obtained a magic array illustration, how could Feng contain his excitement? With the magic array illustration, Zero Wing could produce magic array scrolls without limit at the cost of a few materials. Feng could not help but click on the magic array illustration in his hand, eager to see what kind of magic array he had obtained. Why is it an intermediate magic array? Feng was shocked when he saw its statistics. Magic arrays were also organized into several ranks: basic, intermediate, advanced, master, grandmaster, craftsman. Currently, the majority of the magic arrays players encountered were basic magic arrays. However, even basic magic arrays could be immensely helpful in various ways, such as suppressing monsters that were of Grand Lord rank or below. Magic arrays above basic rank were extremely rare. This was because intermediate magic arrays were capable of suppressing monsters of mythic rank and below. The final bosses of the current 100-man Hell Mode team dungeons were merely Grand Lords. With an intermediate magic array, players could easily suppress such a boss, reducing the dungeon's difficulty tremendously. However, what excited Feng the most was that the intermediate magic array Carrion Walker had given him was a top-tier suppression-type magic array. 9-star polar domain, intermediate magic array. Suppress all enemies within an area of 100 by 100 yards. Requires 9 people to cast. Only usable by magical classes. Required materials: 3 magic crystals, 1 intermediate scroll, 9 starlight stones, and 1 bottle of elemental water. Such a wide area magic array requires only 9 magic classes to cast. Moreover, there aren't any specific classes required. It's no wonder why Carrion Walker said that it is the Thunder Beast Empire's prided magic array. After Feng carefully looked through the illustration, he finally understood just how beautiful of a reward this quest had given him. The mastery books and killing Ray he had obtained were already impressive. Yet, this 9-star polar domain was far more astonishing. It was more valuable than an epic item. It was common knowledge that a limited number of players could enter a dungeon at a single time. If a team used a magic array to suppress a boss, the players maintaining the array would not be able to attack or defend. The more people a magic array required, the greater the effect it would have on the team's combat power. Hence, the fewer people required, the better. Generally, magic arrays that could suppress bosses required more than 10 people to maintain. For example, the demon-suppressing barrier Blue Frost and the others had used against the Great Lord Noya required 12 people. Even so, it was considered a very powerful magic array. Yet, the 9-star polar domain only required 9 people. Moreover, the 9-star polar domain's class requirement was not too specific, requiring only 9 magical classes to cast. On the other hand, the demon-suppressing array specifically required 12 elementalists. The difference between these two requirements might seem small, but for those who had researched magic arrays before, they would know that the more advanced a magic array was, the more people it would require to maintain and the more specific it would be with its class requirement. It was extremely difficult to reduce the requirement by even one person, not to mention reducing the restriction on classes. That was twice as difficult. Only after the Thunder Beast Empire had gathered all of its talents had it managed to construct such a streamlined and practical intermediate magic array. It would most likely be impossible for any other empire to produce such a magic array. Looking at this magic array now, Feng could not help but think of the Thunder Emperor Kaiser. Without any help, the Emperor had created a 6-fold magic array. This showed that Kaiser's magic array research had reached a profound realm. At the very least, he should be a grandmaster. In God's domain, he was as rare as a phoenix's feather. I had thought of using the barrier crystal balls to set a trap, but with this 9-star polar domain, they'll have no chance of escaping. Feng smiled at the illustration in his hands. Although the 9-star polar domain was an intermediate magic array, the materials required to produce it were not especially rare. For starters, Zero Wing had no lack of magic crystals. Meanwhile, starlight stones were stones containing star power. Although they were somewhat rare, there were many places where one could harvest them. The rarest material required to make the 9-star polar domain was the elemental water. Elemental water could automatically absorb large amounts of mana. When used to produce magic scrolls, it could reduce the mana that the magic array required. It was very valuable. Aside from being used to produce magic scrolls, elemental water was also used in alchemy and forging. It was an item with a wide variety of uses. However, even in large-scale team dungeons, the drop rate for elemental water was very low. The various large guilds treated elemental water like a strategic item and would not sell any unless necessary. Of course, if Feng were willing to spend a little more money, he could obtain a significant amount. After Feng stored the 9-star polar domain magic array illustration, he bid Carrion Walker and the others farewell and used a return scroll to teleport back to White River City. Chapter 726, Guild War. Ever since Stone Forest Town had fallen under Zero Wing's control, the town developed faster by the day. Due to the Stoneclaw Mountains, Stone Forest Town had already become a haunt for elite players. Various facilities constantly emerged within the town undergoing endless changes and improvements. At this point, the town had 6 smithies. There were over 20 hotels. Even though more players had gathered than before, there were no longer the long queues there had been when the town had first fallen into Zero Wing's clutches. They no longer needed to wait several hours to repair equipment. However, ever since Zero Wing had given up on developing the Stoneclaw Mountains itself and shifted its focus towards conquering team dungeons and leveling up elsewhere, Stone Forest Town's atmosphere had grown extraordinarily intense. It felt as if a war would break out between the guilds at any time. Although Zero Wing had given up on developing the Stoneclaw Mountains, the number of guilds replenishing their supplies in Stone Forest Town had never diminished. On the contrary, more guilds arrived each day. This allowed Zero Wing's income of magic crystals to remain steady. The various large guilds were extremely envious, and they all hungered to replace Zero Wing as Stone Forest Town's manager. Inside the secret pavilion's guild residence. "Uncle Yuan, you called us here so suddenly, did something major happen?" a young man asked. This youth wore silver scale armor and carried a heavy greatsword on his back. His expression was indifferent, and he wore his red hair in a spiky style. The youth radiated a suffocating bloodthirst that prevented anyone from approaching him casually. Moreover, this youth's level was very high. He was a level 34 berserker. He could rank at the very top of Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list. Aside from this youth, there were also quite a few young men and women waiting in the guild hall. These men and women also had very high levels, with the lowest among them being level 33. The weakest piece of equipment they wore was level 30 fine gold rank. Even in first-rate guilds, such high-leveled and well-equipped individuals were extremely rare. However, almost 100 of such players stood in the secret pavilion's guild hall. Of course, something good has happened. Cold Autumn, don't tell me you've forgotten why the guild leader told you to come here? Yuan Tiexin, who had already reached level 35 and currently wore a set of long black robes, said, chuckling. Every major power would nurture their own experts. Meanwhile, Cold Autumn was the most outstanding individual among the new generation of the secret pavilion. He was also a genius, recognized by many of the guild's elders and founding members. Has the Flower of Seven Sins finally started to take action? Cold Autumn asked excitedly. To let them, the guild's new generation, learn the strength of the Flower of Seven Sins, their guild leader had sent them on a trip to Stone Forest Town. This would show them of the difference between their power and the organizations. At the very least, they would not remain ignorant like frogs at the bottom of a well. Although the secret pavilion was a powerful force in the virtual gaming world, compared to the incomparably mysterious Flower of Seven Sins, the pavilion was almost nothing. After all, the Flower of Seven Sins was an organization that struck fear even in the hearts of super guilds. However, I've heard that after sustaining several attacks from the Flower of Seven Sins, Zero Wings members have become more cautious and have kept a low profile. Both the guild's main force and the Dark Gods Legion either held themselves up in the Divine Colosseum or went out to complete quests after disguising themselves. They have stopped forming teams to level up in the fields. Even the Flower of Seven Sins could not find an opportunity to attack. How could the organization have found a chance to make a move now? Could they be planning to trade their lives, ignoring their safety to kill their targets? Cold Autumn asked, wondering aloud. They had seen a few battles between Zero Wing and the Flower of Seven Sins assassins. However, Zero Wing's members had been defenseless. Before the organization's assassins could exert their full strength, the players from Zero Wing had died. However, Cold Autumn had to admit that there were some powerful experts among Zero Wing. In the last secret battle between the two organizations, Zero Wing had 10 members on their side. On the other hand, the Flower of Seven Sins had sent a party of 6 to ambush Zero Wing. During that battle, the assassin named Fire Dance had performed magnificently. She had fought the assassin's party leader to a standstill. In the end, she had activated a berserk skill, killing one of the assassins and escaping with her life. However, at the end of that battle, Zero Wing had suffered 9 deaths, while one from the Flower of Seven Sins had died. Even so, this had been an amazing outcome as, during the previous exchanges between the two, Zero Wing had always suffered complete while the Flower of Seven Sins came out unharmed. These battles were not due to Zero Wing having weak members. Rather, it was because the Flower of Seven Sins was simply too strong. Cold Autumn had pondered his capabilities in such a situation. At best, he was confident in fighting toe-to-toe with an ordinary member from the Flower of Seven Sins. If neither side had the class advantage, his chances of emerging victorious would be roughly 50%. As for facing a party leader, the difference in strength was too vast. He would not even have the chance to survive or flee. This time, the Flower of Seven Sins had dispatched less than 50 members. Meanwhile, those capable of becoming a party leader in the organization would be, at least, a Flowing Water Realm expert. Cold Autumn himself was merely a half-step Refinement Realm expert. Without much of a difference in terms of basic attributes, he had 0 chances of winning against a Flowing Water Realm expert. Not to mention, his equipment was inferior to the Flower of Seven Sins party leaders. Not only could their equipment rank at the very top of God's domain, but the party leaders had also learned many rare skills. Every one of them possessed powerful berserk skills and were all inhumanely strong. Hence, Cold Autumn admired Fire Dance. The fact that Fire Dance could contend with a party leader and had even killed a party member before escaping showed that she was far stronger than he was. However, part of the reason that Fire Dance could achieve this feat was due to her attributes surpassing the Flower of Seven Sins party leader. She even had a berserk skill with a lengthy duration of 10 minutes. Without these advantages, she too would have shared the same fate as her team members. It's not the Flower of Seven Sins. It is the Star Alliance, Yuan Tiexin said, shaking his head. Hasn't the Star Alliance been focusing on developing the Stoneclaw Mountains? Why would they suddenly want to conquer Stone Forest Town? Cold Autumn did not believe that any power in God's domain was capable of occupying Stone Forest Town. Against current players, level 150 NPC guards only needed one hit to finish the fight. Plenty of high-tiered NPC guards also protected the town. You'll understand once you see the official forums, Yuan Tiexin said. Cold Autumn immediately opened Starmoon Kingdom's forums. Sure enough, at the very top of the front page, massive letters attracted attention to a specific post. Moreover, the post had been created by none other than the Star Alliance's guild leader, Galaxy Past. The Star Alliance officially issues a challenge to Zero Wing. We will wait in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Do you dare accept? If Zero Wing does not have the courage to accept this challenge, you can hide in Stone Forest Town for the rest of your lives. Although the post had just been issued, the Star Alliance's many members had constantly upvoted it. They had also disparaged Zero Wing in the comments. Isn't Zero Wing supposed to be impressive? Do you guys dare accept our challenge? Black Flame, aren't you Starmoon Kingdom's #1 expert? If you're strong enough, stop hiding and fight me. Let's show the world how I beat you up into a pulp. Sure enough, Zero Wing's members are all cowards. The only thing they know how to do is to hide in the safe zone. So, this is the case. Cold Autumn immediately understood what was going on. It seems that the Star Alliance is not doing too well right now either. Without the supplies that Stone Forest Town offers, even with funding, the Star Alliance's development in the Stoneclaw Mountains has lagged behind the other guilds. Naturally, the guild cannot allow this to continue. Now that the Flower of Seven Sins is dealing with Zero Wing's experts, it is the perfect chance for the Alliance to deal a massive blow to the guild. If the Alliance succeeds, once Stone Forest Town's protection period has ended, it will be a lot easier for the Alliance to take over, Yuan Tiexin explained. Hence, I have called you all here to prepare. I understand. I'll have everyone get ready. Hopefully Zero Wing won't try to dodge this battle. Cold Autumn felt that Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame, was not so foolish as to get taken in by such a pitiful provocation. However, it was a different matter when it came to the guild. If Zero Wing wanted to retain its reputation, it would have no choice but to accept the Star Alliance's challenge. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.